Outside of a dark and gloomy castle, we can see Rick Gladiator. He is a man who desires to become an adventurer at 30 years of age. He is receiving a brutal beating from each of the members of the legendary Orichalcum Fist. This is the group of the most powerful adventurers in the entire continent, and their races vary from orcs to vampires. All of them are training our dear Rick to ensure that he is totally prepared for the adventurer exam, even though he raises his head almost on the verge of death, commenting that he is still very far from managing to reach their level. In another scene, we observe a city where people think that dreams must be pursued while one is still young, especially that of being an adventurer, because your body and power are the most important tools of your work, albeit there are still adults who give up on working toward their goals. And now, we are at the registration for the E-rank exam, where Rick goes to the reception desk to collect his identification card. When he is about to withdraw it, Lynette notices that it is Rick, and she is surprised, since it had been about 2 years since she last saw him. She comments that it is quite unexpected to see him there, since he resigned from the headquarters all of a sudden. However, she was even more surprised to learn that he did that in order to become an adventurer. Rick feels embarrassed, because it is a bit foolish to become an adventurer after turning 30. Besides the fact that it is normally teenagers who start with the F-rank exam, and after several years they rise to the E-rank, and Lynette asks where he has been during these 2 years. He replies that he was practicing in the mountains with some adventurers, and before he could continue speaking, a drunkard interrupts them, attempting to seduce Lynette. He invites her to do some crazy things with him, and she kindly requests that he control himself. But the adventurer grabs her by the hand and tells her to shut her mouth, because she is a woman and must obey him. Rick then intervenes and tries to calm him down, but he does not even listen. He then accidentally squeezes the man's stomach, and he ends up fainting, and the people approach upon seeing all this commotion, and Lynette becomes very nervous. It is then that Rick says that he probably drank too much, and advises her not to do that, because it is detrimental to one's health. Lynette then begins to laugh and delivers the identification card for the E-rank exam. When he takes it, he observes that his number is 4242, which in Japanese is pronounced as Dai Dai. So our dear Rick has already started very poorly, and right after that, he heads to the exam. But there he meets Rionette, and she asks if he already managed to register. He even replies that he did, and comments on the good impression that she makes on the young men in that place. She radiates a lot of confidence to the others, although Rionette asks for what reason he is staring so much at her chest, instead of looking at her face. On the other side, we see several young men observing impressed the large handprint on the steel armor of that drunkard, when suddenly other people approach, commenting that that man is Domergs, the diabolical knight, who used to be in a rank, but now he is just a drunk madman who lives wandering around looking for a good fight. Lynette remembers that the only one who approached him was Rick, and wonders if by any chance it was he who did that. In another scene, we see Rick, who is going through the review of the guild, and everything was going very well, until the analysts noticed that he was 32 years old, assuming that he must be another old man clinging to his dream of being an adventurer. Later, each of the aspirants must place their hand upon the crystal sphere, one by one, since this will allow them to calculate their magical energy. One after another they pass, and the majority ranges from D rank to C rank, the latter being the highest. It is then that it becomes the turn of our dear Rick, and unexpectedly not a single hint of magic comes out, or so they thought. So they classified him as F rank. The people mock him, since never before had they seen someone with such a low magical level. But when the next student approaches, the crystal ball ends up breaking. In another test, the aspirants must strike the slime pillar with all of their strength to determine their power. These crystals can absorb very powerful attacks, so they do not need to worry about anything. Rick then realizes that it is a slime bag, and he remembers his training with one of his mentors, Brufston. He taught that the weapon and the magic are not as important as your own body, and for that reason he ordered the poor soul to destroy a golden slime bag, so that in this way he can fully rely on his body. Although Rick gets scared, he does not know how the hell he is going to manage to destroy a thing that is more durable than a dragon's tooth. But this cursed bald man destroys it, assuring him that he can break up to about 200 with a single strike. However, he is going to start by delivering about 50,000 punches per day, until he gets used to it. While Rick is submerged in his thoughts, questioning himself about how painful this training is, number 4 in 236 begins the test, and utilizes a strengthening magic. The next one is the Duke's son, whom everyone talks about so much. His name is Rashid Diarmut, and even though he is only 11 years old, he has C rank magic, and could be a prodigy. The boy then begins to conjure infernal flames from I do not know where, of the 3rd elemental level, but it ends up being a fiasco of a minuscule fireball, even though the people end up liking it, and the instructor even arrives saying that he is a prodigy. This man is that classic sycophant. Rick then asks if that magic is of the 3rd elemental level, because he remembers that it is nothing like that of his mentor when she was training him. Right after that it is Rick's turn, but the instructor stops him and mentions that he is already quite an adult, and if he did not practice magic when he was young, it will be impossible to develop it now. Besides the fact that the result of his magical level test was pitiful, and for that reason advises him to give up. Rick feels the piercing gaze of everyone, and thinks that perhaps he is right, but he strove very hard until hurting his hands, and never gave up. Even though he truly started very late, but there is nothing wrong with that, as long as he is good. So he clenches his fists with all of his strength, and ends up destroying the slime bag, causing disaster on all sides, leaving everyone shocked by his strength. The Duke's son then wonders who the hell this man is, and why he just stole all the protagonism that he possessed. However, he does not worry, since his specialty is defensive magic, and that is where he plans to stand out. But in the defense test everyone is astonished upon seeing that they attacked him with 4th elemental level magic, and Rick did not even move. The instructor notes that he is very impressive, and notices that he is utilizing the magic air cushion, which is of the 1st elemental level, and for that reason warns him that it is going to rise up to the 5th elemental level, and he must try to use much more powerful defensive magic to be able to prevent that attack. But Rick feels embarrassed to admit that he can only utilize magic of the 1st elemental level in attack and defense, and the instructor is surprised by this, since he has a quite large control of magic. Rick replies to him not to worry, and that he can launch his attack, and he begins to invoke a spell, launching a cyclone of the 5th elemental level, since he felt slighted by Rick. But this ends up not causing even a single miserable scratch on him, and far from the exam location. A first-class knight of the kingdom observes the great explosion caused in the test, and for that reason quickly heads to the location. He asks what is going on, since so much scandal is something very uncommon in a normal exam. The instructor tells what had happened, but he thinks it is a joke with him, and asks the person in charge if by any chance the title of receptionist is granted to whoever kills a dragon or something similar. She replies that it is not that, and in another scene, Rick is relaxed, rejoicing for having achieved a score of 100, and all of this thanks to his office experience. But he feels guilty, since he got an F on the magical capacity test. But Rionette says that he trained a lot in recent years, and he has nothing to worry about. Rick then begins to think about those 2 years. It is then that suddenly that little boy from before arrives, all irritated, saying that he wanted to demonstrate in the exam that he is a genius, and because of his fault, Rick appeared more than he did in the presentation. Rick even has to calm him down, but at that moment his sister appears, named Angelica Diermutt. She reprimands him for making her younger brother cry, calling Rick an old man, and Rick feels offended, saying that he is only 30. It is very difficult to wash that cursed white glove, and perhaps she does not know that because she is a noble. But Rionette comments that by picking the glove up from the ground, he accepted the challenge, and later, both meet on the battlefield. Angelica tells him that each participant demands something, in case they win, since that is the way they do it in the kingdom, and for that reason she warns him that the loser will serve as a servant until the death of the winner. Rionette comments to Rick that she is a protective knight of the peace of the kingdom, and it could be said that she is around B rank. Rick gets scared, since a B rank adventurer only deals with very strong monsters, and he is just a simple F rank adventurer who has just started. Rionette warns him that he must remember his training in recent years, and when Rick does that, he ends up vomiting, asking if by any chance she wants to demotivate him. Although he also knows that the most powerful members of the Orichalcum consider him as one of them, and for that reason he gains courage and approaches Angelica. She draws her sword and says that she will try not to kill him, but ends up strengthening herself with magic right after that. Rick notices this, and Angelica advances toward him rapidly, slashing the door that was right behind him, and mentions that she missed on purpose, so that in this way he could observe her great speed. Fred cheers his sister on, shouting that this is why they call her the Lightning Flash. Rick is quite astonished to hear that, and Angelica attacks him once more. But this time Rick manages to observe her, and perceives how slow she is. But it is not that she is slow, it is that he is too fast. And while he was thinking about that, Rionette tells him not to get distracted, and to evade her attack. Angelica is surprised to see that he manages to evade, since he was able to predict her movement. However, she remembers that this is impossible, since only a few first-class knights can keep up with her pace, commenting that he only managed to evade due to a casualty, perhaps luck. But this is going to be the first and the last time, so she attacks Rick again, but she continues to be too slow for him. And in this way he truly begins to think that perhaps he has become too strong. And at that moment Angelica trips on a rock and begins to swing her sword frantically. Rick evades everything easily, being impressed because he could only avoid them by luck. Since he could not predict any of her movements, he ends up regretting a lot, believing that he really is someone strong, while Angelica saves herself from embarrassment by a narrow margin, commenting that now she is going all out, and for that reason strengthens her feet by 1000%. Even though she is truly much faster than before, she still continues to be too slow for our hero. However, he is more cautious, because he thinks that this crazy woman could perform the same technique from before, and decides not to risk his luck. Angelica utilizes the same technique 2 more times, but ends up failing, which finishes by boring Rick, who decides to counterattack to end everything at once. Angelica then advances toward him, but trips once more on a rock, and Rick strikes the ground, and right after the dust dissipates, she becomes terrified to see the enormous crater that he caused in the ground with a single strike. If she had not tripped, she would probably be dead at that instant. She then asks who the hell he is, and Rick replies that he is just an F-rank adventurer, who left his receptionist job 2 years ago. And while he approaches her to continue fighting, Angelica ends up surrendering, with the excuse that she will let him win only for that day. And when she is about to leave, Rick reminds her about the slavery proposal, and although he has not chosen anything, they can do the same that she requested at first, but she is not foolish at all, so she flees rapidly along with her brother. And Rick does not understand absolutely anything of what is going on, and Rionette comments that they are about to announce those who passed, besides the fact that Mr. Brufston and the rest of the guys will not take much longer to arrive for the celebration. Rick then gets scared upon hearing that these powerful monsters are about to arrive. In another scene, we see how the adventurer who manages to defeat a more powerful monster will obtain a treasure that will be capable of granting any wish from the Akashic records. But the person who is telling this story was not capable of defeating it, but has hoped that one of the children of now can become an adventurer, and be the one who achieves that treasure and makes their desires a reality. On the other side, they are about to announce the results of the test. The registration sheet of the students will receive magic, and if it glows in blue they will have passed, and for that reason they will be able to participate on the following day in the second test. This is going to be a mock battle, and Rick worries because he does not know if he will have passed. But Rionette asks for him to calm down and trust his ability. Besides the fact that if he fails, the members of the Orichalcum will triple his training. At that moment the card begins to glow, and rapidly the square turns blue, and Rick gets quite excited. He shows it quickly for Rionette to take a look. Right after that they leave the hall, and Rick smells the scent of something very strong, and it is just the perfume of Rastin Diarmut. He is the eldest son of the noble house of Diarmut. They are rulers of the north, and when he introduces himself Rick tries to learn his name, but since it is too long, he just calls him the Northerner. He then approaches Rionette with intentions of seducing her, but Rick tries to shake his hand to introduce himself. But Rastin does not care at all. He calls him an old geezer and says that he has no time to waste with him. He ignores our dear Rick once more and tries to seduce Rionette again. He says that he would like her to accompany him to become his second wife in the northern lands. While he is there trying to convince the poor girl, our dear Rick intervenes, telling him to stop with the nonsense, that she is his girlfriend. Rastin ends up just mocking his face, thinking that it is a joke in bad taste, but realizes that he is taking the exam, and asks if he is a simple F rank, since he appears to be quite old, so he should have a much higher rank. But Rick does not plan to let it slide. He says that the man does not seem to be so young either, but Rastin tells him that he is an ignorant person for not knowing the strength of an A-rank adventurer. Besides that he is the examiner of the second test, so it is over for our hero. He was already an F-rank adventurer at 14 years of age, 18 years of difference with him. He then shows his medal and advises him to leave once and for all, and continuing to observe Rionette. He comments for them to go have dinner together, but she refuses and approaches closer to Rick. making it very clear that she prefers the company of Rick. Besides commenting that his perfume is very unpleasant, Rastin becomes quite infuriated, warning Rick that he is the examiner of the second test and plans to tear him apart as soon as he has the opportunity. And when he leaves, Rick prays to the heavens so that he does not end up paired with him, but remembers that he is still very close to Rionette and for that reason apologizes, since he left simply saying that he was her girlfriend without even speaking, but she does not even care about that. On the contrary, she rejoiced a lot that he had saved her. And in another scene we see Rastin, who is revolted with Rick, since according to him, there are levels of hierarchy that are innate, and he belongs to a higher class. But at that moment the two siblings approach him crying, commenting that a 40-year-old man had humiliated both. Rastin already becomes enraged by seeing how his two little siblings are crying, but suddenly he remembers Rick, and then he asks his little siblings if they remember the identification number of this man. On the following day, Rick is still somewhat depressed about the mock battle of the second test, besides that possibly he will end up in the fight against Rastin, and he is going to give him a good beating. Although he was lamenting, Linus Lotus approaches him, commenting that he is going to be his examiner in the second test, and for that reason he is quite excited that he has been paired against him. After that, Linus asks the reason why he decided to be an adventurer at 30 years old. After having been a receptionist, Rick thinks that he was judging him. But what he did not expect is that in reality he recognized him out of great admiration, inspiring him to want to be like him. At that he mentions that he became an adventurer at 24, and if he decided to do that at 30, it is because he must feel a very great passion for his dream. Rick then feels touched by conversing with him, and asks how he knows about that. He then replies that he is 40 years old, and his dream is to continue rising in the hierarchy, until reaching a rank, although it has cost him almost 20 years to reach B rank, but he has no intention of surrendering. Rick then admires him, and both shake their hands, but unexpectedly Rastin was listening to the entire conversation, and later when Linus goes down the stairs, Rastin intercepts him. He asks arrogantly if they can talk, and in another scene Rick is in a good mood, but everything that is good does not last forever. It is very short. Then suddenly a young man announces to the members of numbers 4200 or higher that their examiner Linus had fallen ill, and for that reason it would be changed to our tormentor, Rastin of the Diermut family. Rick cannot believe it and wonders what will have happened to him. If just a few moments ago he conversed with the same, and he was completely fine. Besides that he does not know this person named Rastin, but Rionette remembers that it is that man with the strong perfume, who was bothering her on the previous day. Rick then spits all the water that he was drinking, and comments that probably by his surname, he must be the oldest of the young men with whom he had a conflict the last time. And right after he hears the other students scared by the news, commenting that he became in a rank at only 17 years old, and is a genius known as the man of 1,000 skills. But the true problem is his other nickname, because he is the destroyer of F ranks. They say that every year he sinks some aspirant who catches his attention, and Rick enters into panic upon knowing that it was he who caught his attention. On the other side, Rastin is already examining the students, but in truth he wants to destroy them, and for that reason this nickname serves him perfectly. At that, one of his guards approaches him to say something, and he asks what he wants. Rapidly we see how Rick is pacing from side to side, and Rionette asks why he is so nervous, but he tells her that besides being the teacher with the A rank, he has a deadly hatred for Rick, and he is just an F rank, who can only utilize magic of the first elemental level, although he is also afraid of the triple training that awaits him if he fails in that place. So he begins to cry, but Rionette kneels before him, and asks what would happen if it were the opposite, since if the words of others can destroy your confidence, they could also increase it. So she says that she trusts him very much, and knows that he will overcome the test by defeating that idiot Rastin. And Rick gets quite touched upon seeing her, since by hearing her say that, he feels as if he had recovered all of his confidence. At that moment a very strange man approaches him, and proposes to read his future, and he accepts without even thinking. This fortune teller says that since it is his first time he will do it for free. He then goes to sit on the chair, but Rionette notices that the chair has a magical seal, although there is no time to manage to catch him. The fortune teller then begins to mock and takes off his hood, demonstrating in truth to be Fred. However, there is no time for him to speak, because Rionette almost cuts his mouth. She grabs him by his clothes and asks where he sent him. And since he did not know what to say, she threatens him by cutting his eyelashes, warning him that the next attack will be on his eye. Fred then screams that he truly does not know, because teleportation magic is very complex, but since he is not a genius, he probably must be very close, at more or less about 100 meters from there, and on the other side Rick is in the surroundings of the school, and is ambushed by more than 8 guards of Rastin. They are waiting for the poor soul to put him to sleep, and Rick does not understand absolutely anything, and says that they probably must be mistaken. But it is not that. They are not mistaken at all. They just want to tear the poor Rick into pieces. And he soon perceives that the situation is much worse than he expected, since these opponents are A rank and B rank adventurers. And when he is there writhing, fortunately the members of the Orichalcum Fist appear. Ruffston asks what it is that he is doing there, when he should be taking the exam, and Rick does not want to tell him the truth, since in this way he will end up annihilating everyone there. So he says that they were only helping him relax a bit before entering for the exam. The man is the one who does not understand why he is covering for the guys, and Rick shouts to the old man that it is better for them to leave if they do not want to die. But as was to be expected, they do not listen to him, and order the brute to kill him, so he attacks him. But his sword ends up breaking, and Rick recognizes that he strengthened his physical strength a lot, but forgot to reinforce his sword. The bald man was already tired of his talking, so he advances rapidly, but Ruffston stops him, and completely destroys his hand. Although afterward he rapidly cures it with magic. When he was dying of fear, Ruffston comments that he is not balanced, making him understand that the body is just a connected mass, and the other subordinates of the old man ask how the hell an orc can speak. Besides utilizing magic, the old man begins to recognize who they are, and on the other side, Mizet already knew what was going on, and asks Rick if they started to bother him, without him having done anything. And afterward he just admitted it, so he draws his new invention, the Super Fire Spitter Juliet, revised version. Well, at least this one here is the original name. It utilizes stones imbued with magic and lead bullets. Rapidly he shows what his new little toy is capable of, and finishes off the large part of the soldiers of the old man. Rick begins to argue with him, and the old man finally perceives who it is about. But one of his men had already messed up by taking Alishashire Pristeria as a hostage. The people alert him to release her for his own good, and the guard comments that he only wants to play a bit, so she ends up getting excited and smiles. But the guard strikes her, and Alishashire becomes infuriated and uses her magic of the 7th elemental level, without even reciting spells. And the detail is that the girl is only 11 years old, but she is a vampire, a prodigy of magic and of the apocalypse. Her name is Alishashire Pristeria, and at her side is the half-elf half-dwarf, who despite his aspect is over 50 years old, and his techniques seem from 1,000 years in the future. Since the man simply is using a machine gun, he is the best weaponsmith in the world, and the craftsman of 1,000 years, Mizet Eldwar. And last, but not much less important, is the orc who has both physical strength and intelligence, and ends up using all the existing support mages. He is the beastly sage, Ruffston Eshkaza. The old man recognizes that they are the 3S class adventurers, who possess combat instincts that defy all existing logic, and he never thought that he would be able to see them in person, and for that reason, assures that he can retire and live happily for the rest of his life. They then take care of all this mess, and for that reason Rick takes the opportunity to return to the exam quickly. Fred then is surprised to see how well he is, and Rick asks what the hell happened to the wall, and Rionette replies that nothing happened. It was just a small hole that she made accidentally. Yes, it was certainly a very small hole. At that moment Linus appears all battered and beaten. The poor guy was completely trashed. He begins to tell what had happened, reporting that Rastin had beaten him just for asking what his dream was, and he replied that it was to create a school for children who wanted to be adventurers. Apparently the man did not like his dream very much, and beat him up. Rick then became infuriated upon hearing that, and rapidly went to the exam to face him. Rastin is defeating everyone, and out of nowhere a guard appears. With much difficulty he warns that they could not complete the mission, and for that reason probably Rick is going to present himself for the test. But he says that everything is fine, since he will be quite satisfied to beat Rick up a little bit. But Rick is also very willing to give a fine beating to this madman. But before that Rastin is giving a beating to the aspirants, while we meet another madman named Alka. He explains what the 4 fundamental faculties are. They are physical strength, bodily control, magical reserve, and magical control. These are the sources to determine the strength of an adventurer, and since he was born with a skill of being able to visualize the values of the fundamental faculties, he begins to evaluate all of the E-rank adventurers. They have very low statistics. Although upon observing Rastin, he notes that the young man has good characteristics worthy of an A rank, although after looking at them his eyes hurt, since it is quite dangerous to look for a long time at strong people. Right after that he perceives Rick, and thinks that an old man like him should not be taking the admission exam for adventurers at this stage, but upon looking at his statistics he becomes practically blind, upon seeing how incredible the power that he possesses is. And on the other side Rionette is looking for a place for her to sit down and observe the exam. When Aliciashire Presteria introduces herself, she says that she is also a friend of Rick, and Rionette also introduces herself, commenting that they are members of the same group. Both demonstrate great respect for each other, if we can say so. While Rionette invites her to sit down and join her group, Aliciashire ends up accepting, but she is surprised to see that there is an orc among them. Mizet already rejoices upon seeing Aliciashire near Rionette, and asks for both to sit by his side, but Rionette is not foolish at all, so she already moves ahead and takes Aliciashire to another place, since that half-elf there is a big pervert, and in another scene Rick prepares himself by approaching Rastin. The orc Brufston along with the others converse about how well he is going to do. Aliciashire mentions that his examiner is different from all the others, since he is a very demanding a rank, although Brufston assures her that no matter who it is, Rick is not going to have any problem at all. In another place we see Angelica who is cheering Rastin on to give a good beating to this elderly man. At that Fred appears who is all patched up, asking for him to avenge him because they left him in that condition. At that Rastin observes Rick, and is surprised to see that he could escape from his guards. But in any case he leaves him warned that he is not like his guards. He is going to give him a fine beating. But Rick simply ignores everything and asks the reason why he became an adventurer. He, arrogant as always, replies that he did it because he has talent. Even though he is a noble, having become an adventurer gives a much higher status to him. However, his plan is to leave this when the right moment arrives. Since he is tired of all this, Rick comprehends his intentions and for that reason tells him that he does not plan to lose against someone like him. And Rastin gets tired of listening to this talking, and launches an ocular shock of the first elemental level grazing his face. Upon seeing that he does not even move, he asks if by any chance he paralyzed out of fear. But Rick continues ignoring him and remembers the advice of Rionette, that as soon as the duel begins, he has to use the first minute to be able to calm down and think rationally. Rastin, seeing that Rick does not move much, decides to begin. He then uses the spell of the third elemental level without even chanting it, and Rick prefers not to move and block his attack to test his strength. Aliciashire gets scared when the attack impacts him, but Brufston says that she does not need to worry, since for Rick this does not even count as a blow. Besides that, he tells that since he could not develop magic when he was young, Rionette trained him heavily in all other areas to compensate for his weakness. Although Rastin keeps fighting firmly against Rick, Brufston comments that each one of them was his mentor, and he was the master of his physical strength. Rionette taught him bodily control, and Mizet magical control, and Aliciashire simply spent the whole time throwing magical attacks at him. Aliciashire is surprised to learn that Rionette is also his mentor, because she thought she was just a simple servant. But Mizet says that this is her style, and Brufston finishes by explaining that Rick is basically an S-rank adventurer, at the same level as all of them. But he is not aware of it, since he made sure to make him think that any other F-rank adventurer would manage to destroy an enormous rock. On the other side, Rastin continues attacking Rick, recognizing that he has pure brute strength, but is only a commoner who refuses to accept the reality of things, imagining that he could come to win against him. Right after attacking him with several different magic, he thinks that he went a bit over the limits, but did not expect that Rick would not even be shaken by his attacks, and begins to become infuriated by his great resistance. Fred and Angelica are shocked after seeing how he is unharmed despite all the attacks, asking who the hell this old man is. Rastin makes it clear that he plans to finish him off with a clean blow, strengthening his strikes with magic, and advancing rapidly, but Rick simply blocks his attack, and ends up pushing him several meters back. Comprehending what Rionette wanted to say, since Rastin relies a lot on his talent, but does not train, and although he has a large reserve of magic, he continues to be a failure in everything else. Realizing that with an opponent like that, he could never lose, and Rastin assures him that he only got lucky, and conjures a very potent fire spell. The blow strikes. The siblings get quite excited upon seeing him conjure that, since normally he does not do it. But Rick disperses it as if it were nothing, telling him that he uses his magic in a very poor manner, and although he does not have a large magical reserve, he uses his magic with high precision, and Rastin tells him not to get so arrogant like that, because it was just a stroke of luck, and it is not going to repeat itself. When he is about to attack him once more, Rick moves much faster, and the punch hits right in the middle of his face. Although he manages to be saved from the knockout, since he managed enough time to convert his body into steel, because if he did not do that, he would not be here to tell the story. He recognized that Rick is well above an E rank, but that he continues to be just a commoner, and Rick asks him not to bother, clarifying that he did not use magic, but rather only his bodily control, since his precision surpasses by far his strengthening magic. Rastin asks mockingly how it is that someone without magic can be so strong in just 2 years, and Rick replies that he had to defeat dragons, run from explosions, and drown in the liquids of monsters. Although Alicia Shire, upon hearing this, asks how he is not dead, and Brufston reveals that he did die, but his applied healing was precisely to make him resurrect on all occasions. The guy is insane. In this way, he managed to overcome his limits, one time after another, after his deaths. This man is the true example that whoever wants to succeed. At that, Mizet talks about how much Rick has been striving to manage to reach where he is now. He jumped from cliffs, was hit by an enormous asteroid, besides having received a bunch of logs on top of him. But Rastin thinks that he is just a liar, because even if that training existed, no human could have a willpower so strong to the point of achieving that. Rick then says that his reason for achieving it is to defeat the most powerful monster in the world, the Kaiser Alzaper. Rastin just laughs in his face upon hearing an idiocy like that, mentioning that those things are just legends invented by people, and he is already tired of all this, so he decides to put an end once and for all, utilizing a magic spell of the 7th elemental level, binding him with a type of plant. Rick is surprised to see that he used such a spell without even chanting it, and Rastin tells him that he should not be surprised, since he has much more things than that. He then begins to invoke a magic of the 8th elemental level, telling him that this is the most powerful magic that he possesses. He then transforms into a monster of enormous branches, and says that he is anxious to destroy him. Alicia Shire is surprised, since she had never seen this type of magic before, but Rick prepares himself, creating an air shot. Rastin mocks him, asking what the hell he thinks he is going to do with a magic so basic, but he replies that with this, it will be enough to pierce through him with a single blow, since he has used this spell more than 100 million times. Fred thinks that he is a liar, and Alicia Shire also mentions that it is impossible to do that in 2 years, but Brufston replies that Rick is not lying, and says that it is indeed possible to do that, using space-time magic. And on the other side, Rastin prepares himself to give him a beating, and strengthens his fist to finish off Rick's kind once and for all. But Rick also prepares himself with his air shot, and both collide their attacks. But in a matter of seconds, Rick's air shot completely destroys Rastin's magic. He despairs because he does not want to lose, but ends up defeated, fallen in the stands, while Rick makes him aware that his dream remains intact. Right after that, the people are astonished to see that an E-rank adventurer was capable of defeating the strongest of the examiners, and Rionette laughed upon seeing his great victory. And in another scene, Rick meets with the guys after the exam. They congratulate him, and praise him for his good fight. Alicia Shire approaches him, supporting him, and Rick recognizes that he became much stronger than before. Although before he spent the whole time denying it, he thanks the group, and they comment for him not to be so formal like that. And at that moment Rastin passes through the room, very wounded. Rick mocks him, since he had said that a great noble like him would end up crushing him, but it resulted in being the opposite, explaining to Alicia Shire that he only managed to do that because he concentrated on perfecting a technique until vomiting blood. Rastin passes by his side, alerting him that in the next test, it will also be he who will examine him, and when the moment arrives, he will defeat him definitively. They then leave, but unexpectedly, Angelica returns, bowing before Rick. He gets a bit confused, and later, they are announcing those who passed the test, and everyone is with their expectations high. And then Rionette approaches Rick, and mentions that he is much more calm, and he replies that he is no longer worried about that, and was only remembering something. At that he remembers the book of that adventurer, the one who could not defeat Kaiser Alzaper. And now we see the young Rick telling the book, and his dreams to his parents, telling them that he wants to be like the legendary Yamato from that book. His mother is surprised to hear what he wants to be, and comments that this job is very dangerous, and would prefer that he dedicate his life to something else better. But his father denies it immediately, alerting him to stop believing in stupid legends like that, and the best thing is for him to look for a stable job. Rick gets depressed, and decides to go with someone who can test his skills, and later he comments that he possesses the marker of an innate skill. It is quite rare to find people with these statistics, but they still do not know what his skill is in specific, because it is not something that can be developed with training, so he should give it time and wait for it to flourish by itself. Rick gets quite excited upon hearing that, by thinking that perhaps he has an occult power, like that of Yamato, so he runs toward the top of the mountain, anxious that it might manifest, and in this way he could show his power to his parents, and become a great adventurer. On the following day he gets up from bed, and tells his friends what had happened about his skill. Thus it went every day for years without it being able to manifest. And already being a teenager, one of his friends comments that sometimes skills simply do not manifest. And although one has a marker, the best thing he advises is to become an adventurer from now on, and thus he will be able to earn a lot of money. And when it is the moment for his skill to manifest, he will already have an advanced path. But for Rick, the matter of being an adventurer is not just the money. He wants to be one because he has an objective in mind, to defeat the great enemy. And in another scene Rick arrives at his house, mentioning to his parents that he obtained a job. He is going to be a receptionist in a guild called Tiger Road. They rejoice immediately and congratulate him for obtaining a stable and respectable job. And after that it was thus that Rick lasted years being a receptionist of the guild, seeing how the adventurers told great stories, while he tried to be able to develop his innate skill to become one of them. And in this time he ended up meeting Alicia Shire. She carried flowers to unknown children and dined happily with her parents. Although little by little he felt despondent with the passing of the years, since he still achieved nothing. And one day working in the guild Alicia Shire was still new, and did not know the prices that the jobs or completed missions had. But Rick was around there to save her, and explained to her how everything should be done, besides showing the missions that they could perform later. And she then says that she is going to prepare all the things for when the moment arrives. And at that moment out of nowhere she meets the sage, with a very compromising smile. So Rick asks what it is that is happening with him. He then shows a B rank badge, saying that he finally managed to ascend, and now he will be able to make a living as an adventurer. Rick is quite surprised and congratulates him half depressed. Later upon leaving his work, he complains about being seated for 14 years in the same place doing the same thing. Although he is thankful for having a stable salary, if he had become an adventurer it would be much easier. But rapidly he realizes that he is having negative thoughts, and gets up to think about something else. Out of nowhere he hears screams coming from the city, so he goes there to see just what it is that is going on, and perceives the arrival of an enormous giant troll. He is dying of fear upon thinking what the hell this monster is doing in the city, since it is a medium-level monster. But at that moment a defenseless girl passes precisely in front of him, so Rick places himself in front of her to defend her from any attack. But to his surprise the girl shoves him out of the way, and makes mincemeat of the small troll. Rapidly she thanks him for trying to save her, but also tells him that she is an adventurer. And after that Rionette and Rick stroll together through the city, asking several questions to each other. Rick then says that she is very strong, and that she probably is a B rank or a rank adventurer, although Rionette makes it clear that she is an S rank adventurer. Upon showing her badge, Rick is surprised, since the S ranks are managed directly by the headquarters, and are the elite of the adventurers. Although he did not expect her to be an S rank, he must also take the opportunity to ask her something, but requests her to promise that she will not laugh at his face. Rionette then replies that he does not need to worry, because she has not laughed since she was 8 years old, and that indeed was maturing prematurely. Rick then worries a bit about that, but even so, he comments that since childhood he dreams of being a great adventurer, and defeating the great Kaiser Alzaper. Furthermore he has an innate skill, but that it still has not manifested. But his true question is, will he be able to become the adventurer he dreams to be at his 30 years of age? And then Rionette closes her eyes, and recognizes that he demonstrated having courage to face a monster, with all the possible adversities, something much more important in an adventurer. But taking into account that he worked in a guild, in the years of his life most important to develop the magical reserves, now doing that is practically impossible. Every adventurer needs a minimum of magical reserves, and in her thought, if he decides to do that now, it would be completely impossible. Rick takes things calmly, and is thankful that a first-rate adventurer like her has put his feet on the ground. Thus, he can go on forgetting this dream to which he clung for so many years. Rionette then apologizes for being too sincere, but he replies that it was what he wanted. Besides that, this continues to be a great day, because he managed to meet her, and could invite her to eat, although afterward he tells her that it is just a joke, but Rionette accepts, and they arrange it for the following day. Rick could not believe what was happening, and on the following day, already at his work, he is in a very good mood, and shouts to Alicia Shire that he wants very much to work, and at that moment, Sage enters, seeking a mission, and making his usual pose. But Rick had already prepared it, and places it almost in his face. And all the enthusiasm is due to the fact that on this very night, he is going to have a date with Rionette, the S-rank adventurer. It is for that reason that he jumps and leaps, assuring himself that his life is not so bad after all, and who knows, they might become boyfriend and girlfriend after that. Unfortunately, monsters begin to appear, and he begins to look for her, and when he finds her, he realizes that he has nothing to worry about, since she took care of everyone, or at least of the majority at that moment. But many more trolls begin to appear, and she tells him to move away. Then she begins to prepare herself, like a guillotine maid, and with small needles, she cuts the entire body of the monster. In a blink of an eye, it is in a bath of blood, and after seeing that Rionette assassinated everyone, Rick is surprised to see from up close how strong an S-rank adventurer is. However, at that moment Rionette recalls her terrible childhood, in which probably her family had been carbonized by a monster, and she paralyzes, and Rick even approaches to speak with her. And when Rionette tries to reply, a lycanthrope is about to attack them, and Sage stops its attack quickly, and requests that Rick does not begin to flirt. In the middle of a battle against monsters, he is surprised upon seeing him, but later perceives that several adventurers are there, and Sage comments that the guild published about the urgent mission, advising him to stay with the girl around there, since they are going to take care of all of this. They begin to fight against the monsters, finishing them off very easily, while Rick observes them full of envy, because he wanted to give up on his dream, but they seem too cool for him to do that. At that moment Rionette manages to speak, with a bit of difficulty, and says that they must escape rapidly, since it will not be enough with so few adventurers, because all this chaos is caused by a dragon, which is approaching, and Rick is surprised upon hearing her, and Rionette reveals that her body suffers from a trauma, which causes her magic to go out of control when she feels a dragon nearby, and this is quite interesting. Suddenly the dragon flies over them, and prepares to face them, while the adventurers are dying of fear. Upon seeing that a dragon is located in the town, Rick discovers that this is the reason why the monsters fled to the city. One of the adventurers lets himself be carried away by nervousness, and launches an attack at the dragon, causing it to become infuriated. The people then decide to flee, since according to the rules, adventurers of B rank or lower must withdraw if they encounter the dragon. But when they try to leave, they realize that the dragon created a barrier so that they could not escape, and when they did not know what else to do, Rick stands firm before it, assuring that if they are going to die, at least let them do it as adventurers. While he stares fixedly, he thought that abandoning his dream was a relief for him, but on the contrary, his flame begins to ignite, since he knows that he always wanted to live like this, and for that reason he takes a stone and throws it at it. Although obviously it does absolutely nothing, Sage observes him embarrassed, because he does not plan to let a receptionist steal all the protagonism, and all the adventurers begin to attack it, but without any result. The dragon then launches its punch of fire, and Sage rapidly manages to cover everyone with his steel magic, and although they did not die, they suffered a lot of damage from the explosion inside the sphere, and Rionette manages to get up with a lot of difficulty, asking her body to let her face the dragon. At that moment Rick approaches the dragon, assuring that he is going to fulfill his dream, even though it ends up crushing him. However, out of nowhere Rick obtains his new skill, and lifts the dragon with a single blow. He seems to have awakened his innate skill, and takes the opportunity to face this giant lizard with all of his power. The dragon spits fire, but Rick emanates so much energy that he is capable of blocking it without even being shaken, and with a single blow he finishes by decapitating the great dragon. While everyone is in shock with what has just happened, Rick observes his hand, and ends up falling unconscious. On the following day he gets up startled, in what appears to be a hospital, and his whole body hurts down to his backside, and Rionette requests that he does not move, since all of his magical circuits burst, and he has been sleeping for more or less a week. Rick is astonished upon hearing her, and asks why she has been by his side all this time, and she replies that she did that to invite him to her group, the Orichalcum-Fist, since both have the same objective, which is to defeat the Kaiser Alzapair. Rick cannot believe that the monster of the legends of Yamato truly exists, and she reveals that when she saw him fight with courage without surrendering, she discovered that he will be able to become much stronger, and fight together with them as an adventurer. And for Rick it is the first time that someone invites him to do something like that, and for that reason very downcast, he asks if he truly is going to be capable of becoming an adventurer. At that moment we return to reality, where he wakes up from his thoughts, and discovers that he finally became a certified adventurer, and thanks Rionette, since he owes everything to her who initiated him into this world. and to the rest of the group as well, and thanks to his past self who never surrendered, now he managed to become what he most wanted to be, a true adventurer. Some time later Linus is walking in the middle of the mountain to meet with Rick and the Orichalcum group, because it seems that after having passed the adventurer exam, Rick met with him to know how he was doing. Linus congratulates him and proposes to him to go drink something together with his group of friends, but Rick feels somewhat hesitant since he knows very well that all of his companions are animals. Returning to Linus, he still cannot comprehend why Rick warned him to go so well equipped, but at that moment he observes the map that Rick delivered to him, showing the location. There it says that it is the castle of Jehao of the Arces district, but when he observes it well, he finishes by asking himself how the hell that ended up in the castle of the Demon King. Once he arrives at the entrance, he rings the bell, and Rick receives him immediately. While they walk through the castle, we can observe how on the inside it looks very different from what is seen from the outside. At that, Linus asks why he had to go there so well equipped, if there were not even monsters around the castle. He replies that the equipment was not necessarily for the monsters, but rather because he must be well equipped for the beasts that exist inside there. Right after that, Rionette receives him helpfully, and Linus introduces himself to her, and it is then that he sees Alicia Shire, and thinks that she is a very energetic girl, although he did not expect her to launch a level 6 spell without even chanting it. But fortunately Rick intervenes by deflecting the attack, which ends up destroying one of the large walls of the place. He then addresses her calling her senpai, and complains about using her magic inside the castle. The little brat replies irritated that she only wants to play with him, because it has been a long time since she did that. And Linus does not understand why the hell Rick calls this little girl senpai, and even more why they would play with a 6th level magic. And at that moment, Rionette makes the brat aware that she is going to have to pay for the repairs of the castle with her allowance money for the month. She, dying of fear, begs for her not to do that, because she does not want to lose her precious food. And Rick apologizes to Linus, saying that he is going to have to play a little with the girl, or otherwise, she is going to continue bothering them and destroying the castle. It is then that Rionette leads him to a room, telling him that he is in his home. He then observes the surroundings of the castle, commenting that it is very large, and he will not have time to be able to see everything. And at that moment he perceives Mizet. He approaches to converse with him, where he asks regarding the weapon that he has in hand. Mizet says that it is about Patricia, the Ultra Devastator number 6, and that is a very original name. Right after that he delivers it for it to be tested, and Mizet explains that first he must imbue it with his magic, and next he must pull the trigger. When Linus does that, he is surprised by the capacity for mass destruction that this weapon possesses, guaranteeing that if it came to be mass-produced, wars would surely change forever. And in another scene we see Linus strolling through the castle, and asking what kind of distorted place this is, when suddenly he meets Brufston. He notes his presence and invites him to enter, and tells him that he likes very much to read books, and being surrounded by many of them tranquilizes him. Although lately, since he has been training with Rick, he does not have much time to read as usual. Linus is surprised to see that he is an orc, and furthermore an intellectual, and when he hears that he is the trainer of Rick, he requests him to teach him something. And Brufston observes his brave gaze, and notes that it was the same that Rick had, and for that reason decides to teach him a couple of things. Meanwhile on the other side Rick is asking Mizet where Linus is, and when Rick says that, Mizet realizes the mess that happened. He becomes quite shocked to discover that he went along with Brufston toward the forest. On his side he is tied to 2 large iron balls, and falling down a cliff, and when he thinks that he is about to die, he decides to say goodbye to his daughters once and for all. But when he is about to impact against the ground, out of nowhere appears Rionette, who curiously was collecting some provisions, and immediately she gets down from the pig, and comments that Brufston ordered him to run down a slope. But it was not a common slope, it was simply a precipice, and if it were not for her, he definitely would have died, although she already suspected that it was Brufston who did that, because he was the one who most used to kill the poor Rick. Linus pretends that he did not hear anything, and right after Brufston approaches, dragging him, saying that he has to continue his training, and after several hours the poor man is exhausted on the ground, without even being able to carry his soul, and Rick reminds him that he should not have believed them, because that thing about light training makes no sense at all, and he should have taken that more seriously. The training of these guys is simply insane. In another scene they apparently manage to have a visit a bit more civilized, where Rionette serves some tea and they begin to converse, and when she realizes, Linus tells her that she is a very good girl, and asks how her relationship is going. Rick replies that they do not have a relation, Besides that, he is already a boring old man, and someone like her would never notice him. Although Linus replies that age is not the problem, when for example with his wife they have 20 years of difference. But he replies that it is only necessary to be opportune, because when the feelings coincide the rest occurs naturally. Rick observes and thinks that strangely he could be right, and when night falls everyone meets dining peacefully, and Rionette gets up to fetch the things. It is then that Linus approaches Rick, whispering to him that he should seize this opportunity to help her, and share a bit more time alone. Rick then gets up quickly to accompany her, while Linus stays with the others, and comments about the innate skill of Rick, asking them if they could say what it is. And Brufston replies that his skill only activates under certain circumstances, and he cannot control its activation. However, without his skill, and without his knowledge of weapons, Rick would already be at the level of an S-rank adventurer. If he happened to activate his Rick soul, he would surpass everyone in an instant. Linus is impressed to learn how strong he is, and Brufston takes advantage of the fact that he works at the headquarters, and asks if he knows the magical jewels called the 6 gems of the legend of Yamato. They are in charge of opening the portal of the Spiral of Origin, where sleeps this person named Kaiser. Their true objective. Mizet mentions that these gems activate every 200 years, and since they are in the era of their awakening, it radiates a lot of energy. But Linus does not know anything, but he says that he will try to look for something in the confidentiality section of the headquarters. Brufston thanks him for his help, and Rick returns and asks if he has any advice, because unexpectedly for Rionette everything goes very well. Absolutely in everything she is very good, and he could not get a perfect opportunity to offer help. But he ends up laughing because he does not know what else to say. On the other side, the girl is cleaning the floors of the guild, complaining because an adventurer like her should not be cleaning this. In reality, she should be fighting against any powerful monster that appears in front of her. But at that moment she notices the young men, and asks herself who they could be, since they were requesting a quite dangerous mission, and the chief of the guild did not want to give it. Rick then comments that they must have in their team 2 A-rank adventurers, 4 members or more. For that reason they only lack 1 member. Brufston then asks the leader of the guild whom they could ask for help, and he observes Ray, and comments that this is her opportunity to go on a dangerous mission, since she was always wanting to participate in one. She replies then that she does not want to go on a mission with a talking orc, a crazy old man and a strange girl, but the owner tells her to shut her mouth, since this orc is simply a great legendary adventurer respected by all. For that reason Ray observes them better and changes her opinion, deciding to accompany them. On their way she asks what exactly they are looking for, and Rick mentions that they are in search of a magical stone. A friend commented that it could be in this location, however it is quite dangerous, since it attracts many monsters, and one has to be very careful to move around there. Ray tells him that she can face any monster that crosses her path, even though now she is F rank. In a very short time she will reach a rank, and he will be able to brag about having met her. But at that she asks Rick what level of adventurer he is, and he replies that he is at E rank, and has to strive a lot to reach a rank. On the other side, Rionette worries about her dear Rick, but Mizet says that she does not have to worry about anything, because Brufston is with them. At that he takes advantage of the fact that she is distracted cleaning the window, and utilizes a strange machine that camouflages itself, and produces wind to be able to lift Rionette's skirt. This way he will simply be able to devour her with his eyes, and this man simply knows how to use his intelligence to get what he wants. But to his surprise, before he could see anything, Rionette positions herself behind him, breaks the machine, and returning to the group from before, Ray gets scared upon coming across a wyvern, and for that reason pulls away quickly. But Brufston approaches, and hits it right in the snout, destroying almost half of the forest in the process. Ray warns that now he is going to wake everyone up from their nest, and everyone will go after them, but Brufston mentions that she is bothering with her screams, and orders Rick to take her as far away as he can. He then takes her to another place, so that Brufston can finish them off easily, and in a blink of an eye the orc gives a thrashing to everyone. The little girl finishes by burning all the rest, and the two of them observe the spectacle from afar, and Rick notices something that approaches, and takes Ray quickly to protect her. In front of them appears an enormous red wyvern, which almost is considered a dragon, and Rick requests Ray to run very far away, and approaches the wyvern because he wants to verify something, but she takes courage, and tells him not to think about escaping, because despite everything they are a group, and do not think about abandoning him. Besides that the great Yamato would never abandon his allies, and Rick is surprised to see that she is very determined, and he possesses a significant amount of courage, and requests that she cover his back. But when Rionette begins to invoke her level 1 magic, Rick destroys Ivan very easily. He rejoices upon seeing that he has truly become strong, while Rionette wonders why on earth he asked her to cover his back, since he is already so strong. The following day she finds herself thinking about everything that had happened, and her boss approaches, commenting that there is no reason to worry so much, given that these types are far too strong and always commit some madness whenever they appear. She then asks if he thinks she could ever be as strong as them, and he quickly hands the broom to her so she can go train, since if she does not clean the floors she will not be able to become an S rank. Meanwhile, on the other side, the men find themselves analyzing a gem, assuring themselves that with this one, they will be able to locate all the others. Thereupon Mizet utilizes his 6th level elemental magic to locate the other gems. While observing the map, Brufston notices that the city appearing on it is Erectopia. They were very famous for their Colosseum and their combat arts. Approximately 400 years ago, it was a small nation in the desert, and later the 4th king Alexander Erectopia built the Colosseum and celebrated the competition by fighting himself without using weapons, reigning as an undefeated champion against more than 10,000 combatants. Over time, people wanted to defeat him, and those who wanted to see him fight gathered in the Colosseum, and in the blink of an eye the country had grown to the level of a major nation. Literally, Alexander had built the nation with his own fists, and he was baptized as the Fist King, and thus the fighting entertainment industry was born. Both observe the grand statue of Alexander, while Brufston would love to exchange some punches with him, and Rick thinks that if he were alive the entire continent would be condemned to fight eternally. However, they traveled there not to fight with a dead man. They went in search of information about the magical jewels. Meanwhile, they were thinking to whom on earth they should ask, and Rick notices a bald man who is bothering a girl. The bald man proposes to her indecently that she go to a beautiful hotel to rest, of course, to rest. And at that moment Brufston approaches. The bald man becomes quite surprised, but everyone would be surprised as well upon seeing a talking orc. But then the bald man shouts at him not to interfere with a renowned gladiator, since he is a gladiator of the country. But Brufston mentions that this job should be the most popular in the country, although it does not seem that he is very popular, so to speak. It is then that the bald man becomes furious, and invites him to accompany him to an alley that is right beside them. Although 3 seconds later Brufston gives him a fine beating, and teaches him a bit of manners. Shortly after that both introduce themselves to the men as Gold and Militia. Rick takes the opportunity to show one of the jewels that they possess, and they are surprised upon seeing it, since it is releasing a very ominous magic. Brufston asks if they have seen any yellow stone similar to this one, because it must be somewhere in Erectopia. They respond that this gem looks very familiar, and they have an idea of having seen it somewhere in the area. Rick was about to ask where, when suddenly a parade passes through the place, announcing the date of the tournament of the Fist King, which will take place in 1 month. Rionette asks what it consists of, and Gold explains that it is a large-scale tournament, which counts on more than 500,000 people per year. Thereupon he points to the man who is passing by there, and he has been the champion during the last 3 consecutive years. His name is Kelvin Worf. Rionette and Brufston know exactly who he is, guaranteeing that he is someone who is quite strong, and with him being at the top, the tournament becomes something of a very elevated level. Rick then with a look observed that he was strong, but he did not expect him to be so strong to the point of being recognized by his friends. And when he is there in his thoughts, the group becomes excited because the stone that they are searching for is simply on the belt of Kelvin, and therefore the situation seems to aggravate a bit more. And in another scene Kelvin enters the gymnasium, while being acclaimed by everyone. Once he enters an elder appears, asking him how he feels, and he responds that he is not bad, but he is quite depressed, because he does not want the tournament of this year to be a disappointment like the others. The old man requests that he have more enthusiasm, and he should stop getting excited only when he fights with strong opponents. And it is then that Rick and Rionette enter the gymnasium, and Kelvin is surprised upon observing them, because with just one look at Rionette, he can see that she is absurdly strong, and Rick possesses a body that was trained to perfection, although he cannot feel the characteristic spirit of a strong person. When he thinks who they could possibly be, the old man asks if they are some kind of fans, because if they are they have invaded the gymnasium merely to bother him, and this would be considered a very severe violation of manners. And Rick even attempts to explain who they are and what they are searching for, although Brufston mentions that they are being far too detailed, and following the correct procedure is not in his nature, and therefore he goes directly to the point, and requests that Kelvin hand over his belt to him. He is surprised upon seeing a talking orc, and an absurdly strong one, and the old man alerts him to explain his intentions well. Brufston then comments that the jewel he carries on his belt, a long time ago belonged to a member of their party, and they have been searching for it for many years. He offers that they exchange the gem for anything they possess, and the owner thinks that it is pure nonsense, and orders his people to expel them. But Kelvin detains him, and tells him that his nose is saying that all of this is real, and they are not lying. And that is why with all this sense of smell he is probably the brother of Tanjiro, and he mentions that he cannot simply hand it over, since the belt reflects the pride of the Erectopia people, and if he wants to obtain it, there is only one way to do so, and that is by reaching the top of the Fist King tournament. Brufston understands that he is right, and apologizes for all the scandal that he had caused, and therefore ends up withdrawing with the group. Rick does not understand why that is happening, and asks what it is that they are going to do, and he responds that Kelvin has already stated what they must do. They have to go to the tournament. On the other side, the old man mentions that it was not right to let them go just like that. It would have been much better if they had dealt with them right there with his students. But Kelvin mentions that he is mistaken, since if he had sent everyone they would have been massacred by them. The old man did not think they would be so exaggeratedly strong like that. And Kelvin becomes quite excited, since apparently this tournament here is going to provide a lot of content for him. In another scene we see Rick, who is in the qualification test to become a gladiator, and be able to participate in the West League of the tournament. He thinks that Brufston made it seem very easy, but he is quite certain that things will end up becoming complicated. Thereupon he worries about the other people, who will have to fight against Brufston in the East League. Therefore he is going to have to pray so that no one ends up dying. After some time he goes to the testing zone, and an exam official receives him, and he comments that he is going to perform a battle simulation, where his opponent will be selected by chance, from within a group of people who became gladiators in the past year. Furthermore, even if he wins or not, if his power is higher than the standard, he will pass the test. Rick understands what he says, and asks if his adversary is quite strong. The official responds that yes, because in just 4 months they rose from the 5th league to the 1st. And they call him the hope of the younger one. At that moment a girl enters apologizing for having arrived very late, and comments that she is going to be his opponent. Rick notices that he had heard her voice before, and she is the cursed Angelica from before, and upon seeing Rick she ends up becoming frightened, asking what on earth he is doing in this place. He responds that he could ask the same question to her, and the official observes that they know each other. He says that certainly they will have much to talk about. However, the schedule of the exams is quite tight, and the best would be to start the combat right away once and for all. Both end up accepting and prepare to enter the simulation. But thereupon Angelica becomes frightened upon seeing that the situation only worsens, since although losing in this place is not going to affect her negatively, her pride will not allow her to lose 2 times to Rick, who does not appear to be so strong like that. But his appearance deceives greatly, since this guy is absurd, and defeated her older brother who is of a rank, so he is not to be thrown away at all. And from afar an old man observes Rick, and mentions that he is too old to become a gladiator, and therefore thinks that perhaps he is despising their proud competition. But after that he calms down, because he knows that the famous hope of the youths will end everything very soon. And the simulation then begins. She tells Rick to know that she does not intend to lower her guard like before, and although suddenly something strikes her legs making her fall, she even attempts to approach, but ends up falling once again. This is a technique that he developed in the exam, the first of the 8 secret containment techniques. The name of the technique is the power of the leg sweep. Not too proud of a name, Angelica then becomes ashamed of having to lose once again, and Rick mocks her face, mentioning that although his attack is not so powerful like that, it will not let her move from there and will continue making her fall. It is basically that leg sweep from Mortal Kombat. Absurd man. Meanwhile he goes on dealing a small amount of damage, but it will not hurt her seriously. She ends up becoming frightened and attempts to attack once more, but she ends up falling again, and without being able to move, barely from the spot. Rick observes that she has not yet lost the will to fight, and mentions that now it is his turn to attack. And at that moment Angelica is scared to death, and mentions that it is not necessary, because she is going to surrender. Shortly after that Rionette and Rick are about to leave, but Angelica approaches him, and complains about why he is in that place, and Rick responds that he wants to win the upcoming tournament of the Fist King. They then end up going to a restaurant. Angelica mentions that she already knows he is extremely strong, but comments to him that the tournament is not solely about that, because physically it is impossible for him to win the upcoming event, since he does not understand how the leagues function in this place, and Rionette asks what she means by that. The girl then explains that to participate in the tournament, first one must position themselves among the top 7 of the league. Naturally everyone begins and is in the 5th league, and he must go rising and have a minimum of 10 matches in each league, and it would be a total of 40 matches in which he must fight. In another scene we see Rick. He is registering to participate in his first combat, and the receptionist mentions that his opponent is going to be Chris Albert. There are some rumors about this guy that he does not follow rules and uses a weapon, although the evidence has not been found to search him. He alerts that he must be very careful with him, and later Chris Albert prepares to fight against Rick, and he observes that apparently he does not have any weapon, but he actually has one hidden. It is an impact stone, which causes his blows to be approximately 20 or 30 times stronger. The referee then mentions that the match has commenced, and Rionette along with Angelica observes the battle from the stands. Grits approaches Rick, and rapidly throws his coat to take away the vision of the guy, and connects a very strong blow to his chest, causing a huge explosion. He laughs confident that the combat has ended, and mocks Rick for losing in his first combat, but thereupon he observes his arm, which is completely destroyed. Rick then realizes about the impact stone, and comments that if he uses this gem without training well, it is normal that his arm has been destroyed in the process. He mentions that the boy should have trained harder, his 4 fundamental faculty, and Grits is scared to death, since previously he had broken huge stones with this gem, and they could not make any scratch on him. But Rick decides to end everything once and for all. He then passes scraping a powerful attack on the face of the guy, finishing him immediately, leaving him all broken there on the ground. The referee declares Rick as the winner, and the old man laughs, since someone quite impressive has arrived, who is going to be capable of facing the champion head-to-head. In another scene we see Angelica, who is preparing to face her opponent, whom she wins against very easily, dodging the attacks, and delivering a kick right into the rib joint. That one hurts. Then rapidly the referee deems the combat finalized, and proclaims Angelica as the winner, and after that Rionette and Rick congratulate her, and she rejoices greatly upon having achieved her first victory. But there still remain 39 to win. Angelica comments that her strength certainly can deal with those 39 that remain, but even so she is not going to be able to enter the current tournament, since an athlete can only compete in one arena per day. Furthermore, in the 5th league, there is a multitude of people, and the arenas are practically overflowing. There are dozens of preliminary test arenas, and the most distant ones are up to 30 kilometers from each other. Therefore, finding an empty one among them is very difficult, and no matter how much strength remains to him, he will not be able to have more than 1 match per day. Thereupon she mentions that the number of matches that one can have in a day usually is 2, because even she took a week to rise to the 4th league. But before she could continue speaking, Rionette interrupts her, mentioning to Rick that now it is time for him to be leaving, and she comments that he has to go to the Green Hill Arena in District 23 starting from 11. She mentions that they had already moved ahead, reserving a slot in advance, but before Angelica mentions to him that the arena to which he is going is Green Hill, which is approximately 30 kilometers away. Even with a carriage it would not be so fast as to arrive in 5 minutes, but Rick mentions that there is no way he can use something as slow as a carriage, and since he is in a great hurry, the best is for him to simply leave running. Angelica thinks that he is making fun of her face, because of course, it is basically impossible to run 30 kilometers in just 15 minutes, even for her, but there is no time for her to continue speaking, since Rick leaves shooting out running, and Rionette asks her if she plans to observe the other matches of Rick after that, since that way she can take her with her to the arena, and she responds that yes, and Rionette picks her up rapidly to take her, leaping across the buildings, and shortly after arriving, Angelica almost vomits her breakfast. She then comes across Rick, who had already won his second battle. However, he also complains, because he utilized one of the 8 secret containment techniques for his counter-attacking opponent. But I think that he needs to adjust this technique a bit, since the guy was almost sent to the afterlife. Shortly after that, they begin to go rapidly toward his other combat, and Angelica returns to being carried by Rionette. And in this manner Rick went on winning each one of his battles, and obviously in each one of her journeys, Angelica almost threw up her soul. She is also beyond belief, since he managed to win 40 combats in 4 days. This is an absurd feat, and sometime later, they are drinking tea. Rionette then asks if the girl wants to win the tournament, and she responds that yes, because she would not be participating if she did not want to win. But with Rick participating it will be practically impossible, since this old man is insane, and Rionette responds that Brufston is also participating in the league, but he went in the opposite direction, and reveals that he is an S-rank adventurer, the very same one who trained Rick. Angelica is scared to death, because apparently Rick is not the only monster who is participating in this tournament. And then she begins to say that although winning appears impossible, she is not going to let that man, and we are left without knowing what man that is, and Rionette even asks what it is she is referring to with that. But she realizes that she spoke too much, and remains quiet after that, and changing the subject. She then asks where Rick has gone, and Rionette responds that he continued running to the region of Tronia, and Angelica sighs, since it is approximately 600 kilometers round trip. But although she wants to be surprised, she can no longer do so. What is surprising indeed, is that Rionette can continue at this pace. Furthermore, the entire time she is together with him, making them look like a couple. Rionette comments that for her it was never a problem to keep up with his pace, and it does not matter much what others think. So it is all the same to her. She truly feels a great affection for her dear Rick, and Angelica begins to tremble, because she really did not expect her to respond to that in this manner. On the other side, Rick finally returns from Tronia, and at that moment he is intercepted by the director of the West League Committee, named Snape Resurrect. He is basically a lizardman, or dragon. Who knows what earth this is here? He approaches and mentions that it is a pleasure to meet him, because he is the one who qualified as the fastest in the history of the West League. Both shake their hands, and Snape is informed by one of his subordinates that Miss Angelica does not appear. Rick listens to everything and asks him if he knows Angelica, and he responds that yes, because they are old acquaintances. Although he is a simple merchant, the House of Armust is very kind to him. Rick then asks when he stopped being a fighter, because upon shaking his hands he realized that they are equal to those of someone who trained without blinking. Snape is surprised by his intuition, recognizing that his reputation is well deserved, and relates that it was approximately 20 years ago, where he won a small tournament, and although the clamor and the victory from the public were very tempting, he decided to retire at 23 years old, this being his first and only victory. At that moment he realizes that he is speaking too much, and reveals that a fighter from his company is also going to participate in the tournament. So he recommends that Angelica does not get too excited, and tries to take good care of herself, because she is going to have a lot of work. Rick is surprised by what he is listening to, but Snape ends up leaving. It is then that Rick enters the inn, and a girl approaches rapidly to ask him if he is well, since she heard him conversing with Mr. Snape from the Dragon Note Company. She warns him that he appears entirely gentlemanly, but rumors say that he is actually a mobster, and the main sponsor of the tournament of this year. Rick is surprised, since that miserable dragon had said that he was a merchant. Furthermore, he also mentioned that someone from his company is going to participate in the battle, and thereupon he begins to listen to some strange guys conversing, quite excited to see the bunny girls that will be at the event of this year, in addition to a very sensual black elf. And later we find ourselves with Angelica dressed as a bunny girl, sponsoring the tickets for the tournament, including poor Rionette is also dressed as a bunny girl. Bad influences do exist indeed, but as is standard there always has to be a crazy drunkard who will harass the poor girls, and he keeps wanting to have some affair with Angelica, but upon touching her, he mocks because she looks like a washboard, so she ends up giving him a brutal beating. And thereupon Rick appears asking why she is dressed in that manner. She then begins to explain, but thereupon Rick observes Rionette, and both become enchanted, looking at one another, and Angelica becomes quite jealous, because when he saw her, he did not react in that manner. On the other side, the trainer of Kelvin is informing them of all the exploits that Brufston had in his short time in the league. Meanwhile, Kelvin becomes excited upon seeing the victories of Rick, mentioning that finally he is going to have a worthy battle this year, and thereupon the old man remembers the first time he met Kelvin, where he went to recruit him to go to Erectopia in order to be able to fight in the tournament, assuring him that he could achieve everything he wanted, such as the strong fighters he is searching for. On the following day, Angelica and Rick win several battles, but in one of these Angelica must face a dangerous creature from the marine depths. His name is Taylor Bright. The arena is absurdly warm, managing to animate the girl considerably, and Rick realizes that she is truly very popular in this place. On the other side, the commentator begins the combat. Angelica loses no time, and uses her swift feet ability to attack him from all sides simultaneously. She manages to connect several blows and invokes a water barrier to surround him, and rapidly utilizes her second level magic, connecting a thunder arrow on him. Rionette recognizes that she is strong, and Rick confirms it, since she is managing to use body control and magical control to dominate the swift feet and her physical strength. Furthermore, along with mana in order to be able to maintain continuous use, so she is using the four fundamentals in a balanced manner. She is considerably skillful, and at the same time fights casting complex magic. Utilizing these rules, she is even stronger than her older brother. However, she is still at a disadvantage in this combat, and Taylor finds himself as if nothing had happened, telling her that this weak kitten attack is not going to manage to exhaust him even a little bit. He says that he will be able to endure about another 1,000 attacks like this one, and launches himself in her direction, connecting a fine and very strong blow, telling her that she is much slower than when she began the combat. By luck, Angelica manages to block him, but the impact is so strong that she ends up going against the wall, and Angelica dealt an overwhelming number of blows. But the defense of Taylor is practically unbreakable. It is as if she were merely caressing him. He does not even feel it. But when she was impacted by a blow of his, she ended up unconscious on the ground, and rapidly pronounced that Taylor is the winner. Shortly after that, Angelica is being healed, and the healer advises her to rest for a while, because although she is almost recovered, she must not abuse her body. She expresses her gratitude, and later goes out and meets with Rick, who mentions that she did a great job, and asks how her wounds are, and she responds that he should not care, since that is none of his business. Rick mentions that she lost by having been too hasty, because it was quite clear that her opponent possessed a very good defense, so she should understand that he was not a rival for her, and should search for a different strategy to defeat him. But when he was about to continue speaking, Angelica simply ignores him, and repeats that this is none of his business, and leaves, and Rick perceives her, mentioning that although she was at a disadvantage, she was still sufficiently strong to be able to win. Then he asks her why she was in such a hurry, since if there is some important reason he might be able to help her, and Angelica hesitates for a moment, but knows that he is right, and now is not the moment to be stubborn. So she relates that in reality Snape is her fiancé, and he has many times gotten her family out of trouble. Everything began approximately 1 year ago, when her parents passed away in an accident. Her brothers and she took total control of the lands of Armust, but the lack of experience made them end up in financial problem. It was at that moment when her mean grandfather intervened, and made the contract with Snape, who aspired to be among the nobles and royalty, marrying Angelica, in exchange for a large sum of money for the Armust family. They ended up accepting, and the debts were settled. But when they attempted to cancel the matrimony, it was already too late, and Rick is quite surprised upon hearing that he was her fiancé, because he did not believe she would like that type of person. But it seems that he was not listening at all, so she shouts at him that she has just explained everything that occurred, and even so he does not understand. Thereupon she comments that she discovered a way to annul the matrimony, and it is because she discovered that he sponsors this tournament. And when she was about to tell him, they hear the commotion in the tavern. Upon approaching, she realizes that Taylor is arguing against a young man who is bothering a girl. He alerts him to let her go, because she only bumped into him accidentally. But Geese tells him not to be an idiot, and to stop meddling in his business, and Taylor strikes him heavily, but he does not even feel a tickle, so Geese grabs him by the neck. Shortly after that he slams his face onto the ground as if it were nothing, leaving the guy unconscious, and Angelica is quite surprised to see that the guy finished Taylor in a single blow, who was the guy she was having a lot of difficulty with, while Geese continues holding the girl by the neck, asking how she plans to compensate for having bumped into him, since because of her he ended up spilling his drink, and the girl mentions that she only spilled a little of his drink. But Geese is not interested in the quantity. What matters is that he is upset, so this scoundrel goes there and rips her clothes. But thereupon, Angelica intervenes, shouting at him to stop. Geese orders her to shut up, and when he is about to strike her, the one who intervenes is Rick, advising him that it is better for him to calm down, and he attempts to release his arm, but upon seeing that he cannot manage to do so, he becomes quite upset, and asks if by chance he wants him to kill him. But thereupon the one who intervenes is Snape, ordering him to calm down, since the tournament will take place in a little while. Geese then is surprised upon seeing Snape, and leaves that place, saying that he will continue drinking somewhere else, while he apologizes to everyone. And Rick approaches, asking who on earth that guy was, and he responds that he was his youngest brother Geese, who is quite violent when anything bothers him, and since there is no one who can stop him, he usually causes a lot of trouble. Shortly after that Snape leaves, and Angelica then finishes telling her story to Rick, revealing that the money he offered in exchange for her engagement was very high, so she investigated the accounts of the Dragonauts, and thereupon she ended up discovering that they do not have enough money to take her, but they are participating in this tournament precisely to achieve that. They are going to use their sponsored fighter to be able to manipulate some results of the tournament, meaning they are going to help his brother, so she must defeat their fighter as quickly as possible to be able to annul the commitment. However, she also knows that even if she reaches the final, she will never be able to defeat Geese, so Rick proposes that he could train her, and she is left in shock, since he is practically announcing her death in advance. And now we see Rick beginning to practice with Angelica. He orders her not to neglect physical enhancement, or otherwise she will end up dying. They then begin with some 30 kilograms weight tools, while she is going to be dragged by Rick, who is 1,000 times faster than her. In this manner, he is basically forcing her body to be much faster. Although this does not have much logic, Angelica then accelerates very well, but her movements are quite irregular, and this training will help her to perfect her technique. But the girl is desperate, begging him to stop or to soften the pace. But Rick does not care at all. He just ignores it and encourages her to exert herself, because when you think you can no longer take it, that is when you break your limits. He thinks about giving a brief rest after 6 silly little hours of training, and after 6 infernal hours, she cries desolately on the ground, while Rick congratulates her, since he could not expect less from a second-class knight. Poor Angelica does not even have shoes anymore, and Rick reveals that Rionette did that to him too. He ended up losing consciousness, and died 3 times on the same day. Then Angelica becomes motivated, because she managed to survive on the first day, but Rick already brings her down, since they are still in the middle of the day, and he is only going to give her a rest of 1 hour to be able to eat. Later they are going to return to training, while poor Angelica begs for mercy. Sometime later, on the 5th day of training, she is already eating better. The thing is that every time she went to train, the poor girl ended up practically being tortured. So, in a strategic retreat for her mental health, she ended up hiding and fleeing from the training. But Rick did not let it slide, and found her by searching for her throughout the entire kingdom, and it took him only 15 minutes to do so. Angelica then asks if by chance he went to scold her. Although Rick confesses that it is the opposite, he understands perfectly that she wants to run away, because he himself lost count of how many times he attempted to escape during his 2 years of training. In addition to the thousands of times that he died trying, he then remembers a certain occasion when he died, where Alycerette gave a bit of her mana to Brufston, so that he could revive him, and upon doing so, the first thing she said is that he now has mana to revive him about 2,000 more times, so his suffering had just begun. I do not know how this guy is not a poor traumatized man for life. Angelica then cannot believe that he managed to endure 2 years in this joke, and Rick confesses that he attempted to leave them, but Brufston asked what would be worse to bear, the regret for leaving the training or his current situation, and upon placing it on a balance, the regret would be much worse to bear, so he ended up leaning more toward enduring the suffering. Although Brufston at one moment commented that if he wanted to surrender, they would tell him to go away with a smile, and this made everything become even more bearable. Angelica then relates that she detests the customs of royalty. They educated her to be a noble since she was little. Social behavior, makeup, fashion, all of that. She learned all these things from an early age, but she does not want that very much. This life is not for her, since she desires to contribute to the Armust family, but not as a noble, and instead as a warrior. Her dream is to be the first-class female knight, and her balance also leans towards suffering, just like that of Rick, so she is not going to give up, and is going to continue with this cursed training to manage to conclude her objectives. And a bit later they go to train on the grounds. There we see that the fighting style of Angelica bases itself considerably on the swordsmanship of the knights, meaning, with a sword she is much stronger, but in a coliseum they do not permit weapons. But by luck there exists a technique that can convert her hands into a sword, and it is then that Rick requests help from a specialist. And after a little bit of time we see a combat at the end of Block C. There is Angelica against Silver Hogan, and he is releasing an absurd aura, extremely powerful and murderous, in addition to being very savage. Even one of the spectators wonders what on earth happened to Angelica, and his companion comments that she is at an absurd disadvantage against Silver, since her refined style of combat is not going to serve her for anything. But she merely delivers a kick to the guy and simply wins the combat, becoming the champion of Block C. This is the fruit of her training, although she continues suffering some traumas from this training, and in the afternoon she wonders what on earth she did in the combat. But Rick tells her not to even worry, since now the important thing is that she will be able to participate in the final tournament. And now people consider her a danger, and thereupon enter the small girl Alycerette and Mizette, where Rionette asks if it was true that the Empire possessed one of the 6 gems, but lamentably everything was a lie, and they only wasted time. Thereupon enters Brufston, accompanied by the guy who now is bald, and later everyone eats together, and Brufston advises that they are going to enjoy themselves considerably in the tournament. Furthermore, they are still going to leave with the gem. He asks Angelica if she is going to participate as well, and she responds that yes, since now Rionette and Rick are training her, and since they almost killed her several times, I think that she is quite ready to participate. However, her training is not going to attract. Although it has been for a short time, her efforts gave results. Everyone motivates her, and she must take charge of demonstrating the results of her training. And thus some time passes, until the tournament of the Fist King begins. There are all the competitors who opened their way up to here, and now after a draw they will be paired with their opponents. The first combat is going to be between Helga Murder against Geese. The second combat is going to be Angelica against Dole. The third is going to be Rick against Selena, and Rick is quite joyful, since they did not place him against Brufston, because had they done so definitively he would have withdrawn. In the 8th combat they will face Eddie Gracie against the 3-times champion Kelvin Worth, while in the 5th it will face Brufston against Donnie Fisher. Including this guy has a significant amount of fans. Upon finishing the pairings, Angelica comments to Rick that Geese is not going to face Kelvin or Brufston until the final, and probably they are going to do some trickery so that he has an easy life until reaching the final, since that way he will not impress the public with his strength, and soon Snape is going to lose on purpose, and with that he will win a lot of money. But she wants to face him in the second round, where she is going to tear him to pieces. But Rick asks her what she is going to do if she does not find him until the final, and she remains perplexed, since she had not thought about that. A bit later, while they walk through the Colosseum, they come across Kelvin, and the trainer remembers when they newly commenced. He took him to his gymnasium to train him, and there he faced Garen, a semifinalist, but they alerted him that he could not kill him, because he would be disqualified. In addition, weapons and armor were prohibited. Kelvin was very confident, but shortly after beginning he already found himself prostrated on the canvas. He has a very good combat instinct, and is quite strong without having a trainer, so if he perfects himself as is due, he will become a magnificent fighter. And upon being defeated for the first time, everything changed. He trained much more to defeat the strongest ones, and the more strong people he defeated, the much heavier he trained, achieving the fight that he so much yearned for. There he had the victory in his first tournament, becoming champion. And on the other side, in the first combat he was facing Geese, who received a great quantity of blows, but without even moving. He is quite bored. The guy continues attacking, while Geese strikes the ground to create a smoke screen, and with a single blow he ended up leaving the guy out of combat. Angelica recognizes that he is very strong. However, despite his strength and resistance, he appears to be an amateur. The tournament continued unfolding, and Kelvin demonstrated before everyone that he is an impressive fighter, advancing, killing opponent after opponent. But it is not as if he were reacting fast to the movements of the opponent. In reality, he simply knows what they are going to do. Brufston comments that he trained his great sense of smell and can detect everything, such as, for example, electrical signals, adrenaline, and all the minimal changes in the body. This makes him have an olfactory prediction, and he is a great gladiator. But suddenly he ends up receiving a blow, and although the men notice that he did it on purpose to end up animating the public, and then with a blow Kelvin simply manages to defeat the guy. But Rick realizes that the trainer became quite upset with this, because Kelvin was very inconsequential. In the following days they are all in the Colosseum for the second round, and Snape approaches them, and asks if he can sit. He observes that Rick is accompanied by very interesting people, and Rick asks if he is not going to watch the combat from the VIP zone, and he mentions that this combat is very important, because his brother and his fiancée are facing each other, so it is normal that he wants to watch the combat from as close as possible. Although on the other part Angelica comes across Geese, and advises that she is going to be his opponent. He mentions that she is human, that his brother advised him not to touch her face, so as not to ruin the wedding, but Angelica responds that he is not even going to touch her, because she intends to demonstrate to him what she achieved with her effort. But Geese mocks her face, because only the useless and commoners set themselves to train like crazy to learn any nonsense, whereas he only spends the fortune of his father for pleasure, and thus continues being the strongest. Angelica comments that all of this is a lie, because it is impossible to achieve a physique like that without doing anything. But Geese reveals that he lives as he wants, and his body is a temple, so he could say that he has a natural talent, and arrogantly comments that he is not going to hit her belly, since that way she will be able to generate children for his brother. And shortly after that he advances, while Angelica is filled with much anger. Later both find themselves in the Colosseum, and once the combat initiates, Angelica advances against Geese, but her kick does not manage to do any piece of trash to him. He counterattacks, but Angelica dodges and returns to attack him, but without any effect. She understands that her attacks cannot cause damage to him, so she decides to use that. Rionette gives her an encouragement, and Angelica uses the reverse flow, advancing against Geese, and continuing until cutting his skin, While she feels quite confident, his brother is surprised, because not even the sharpest sword could scratch the skin of Geese. Rionette advises that he should not underestimate Angelica, since that is the secret technique of the cutting cut. And this name is absurd, cutting cut. In her training, Rionette said that this was the technique that she wanted the girl to learn, although these two monsters request impossible things for her to do. But Rionette advises that this is nothing impossible at all, since even Rionette can do it, and that is considering she does not have much precision. The trick consists in feeling the air, and if Angelica manages to learn this technique, she is going to be much stronger. It cost her a lot to master, but she practiced as if there were no tomorrow, and in the end, she succeeded. She ended up reinventing the technique in her own style, and upon releasing a magical energy accumulated in her body, she manages to release an aura that manages to cut everything. It is that famous cutting cut, and this puts a great load upon her body. But after overcoming 1 month of infernal training, this here is nothing anymore for her. Angelica is the only one who could utilize it in this manner, and she continues cutting the guy incessantly. But Geese becomes upset, and then he begins to use his techniques. He creates a smoke screen and attacks through it, but Angelica manages to dodge his attacks. But Snape confides greatly in his brother, and he equals the speed of Angelica in an instant. Then he delivers a heavy blow to her face, and she ends up going against the wall, and comments that there is nothing better than humiliating mediocre people like her. Snape comments to Rick that the strength of his brother finds itself at another level. Everything began when he was a famous fighter, when he then met Geese and his adopted brother of 8 years old. On that day then, he gave him such a huge beating that the guy could not even stand on his feet. He was the one who caused him to decide to retire. And here Geese is the true prodigy, who was born with incredible talent for combat. He comments to Angelica that so many years of training served her for nothing, and at this moment she should be hating her parents for not having given birth to her with talent. But he remembers that they already went to the afterlife, and mentions that it is like father like son. And thereupon Snape also comments to Rick that Angelica thought he was going to rig the combat, but there was no necessity at all for that, since his brother has sufficient strength to win the tournament easily, and no one would expect that the sponsored fighter would be the one to win it. So he is taking advantage of this. Since he bet a lot of money on the victory of Geese, he is giving a brutal beating to poor Angelica. While everyone in the Colosseum looks astounded, she is already at her limit and can no longer retaliate, but she does not intend to surrender, and he takes her by the hair and comments that she is never going to win, since he is simply a genius, and he wants to see when she is going to realize this. Angelica, with the little strength that remained to her, attempts to deliver a punch, but it is very weak, and Geese, bored of her, ends up throwing her once more against the wall. Then he, already tired of all this, decides to kill her, but Rick shouts that the combat has already ended, and Geese ignores and advances against Angelica. And it is bizarre to think that in the beginning he mentioned that he would not even hit the girl, since he did not want to leave the wife of his brother all broken up. But I think that he forgot about this here. By luck, right before he pierced her chest, Rick threw a shoe, managing to cause the attack to fail, and they declared him as the winner of the combat. But Rick is quite angry, and takes Angelica out of the Colosseum on the stretcher. Rick goes there to pick up his shoe, but in the corridor ends up coming across Geese, who returns the shoe to him, and comments that he has a lot of courage to do what he did. He even attempts to attack Rick, but he dodges very easily, and to build up a little bit of aura, he even puts on his shoe right there, and comments that he should not be in much of a hurry, because it makes no sense at all to go give him a beating in this place. He intends to humiliate him in front of the entire public. And shortly after that, Rick, who is considerably angry, ends up smashing the face of his next opponent, and soon reunites with the healer of Angelica, who advises that the girl suffered a lot of damage, and all very severe, and the treatment will take a long time, but at least her life is not at risk. He thinks that poor Angelica went through all this infernal training because she did not want to abandon her dreams, and imagines that she must be feeling very frustrated. On the other side, Brufston also finishes his combat with a single blow, and thus, the tournament goes on developing, reaching the semifinals, which is Rick against Geese, and Brufston against Kelvin. Shortly after that we see Rick training in the corridors, and upon returning to the city and walking through the corridor, he comes across Angelica. Brufston was the one who healed her with sacred magic, and Rick reminds her that the best is for her to rest, because many people think that sacred magic is miraculous, but although it truly heals you, the internal damage and the exhaustion continue there. Then Rick says goodbye, but Angelica apologizes to him, because despite him having made her train like crazy without gaining anything in return, she ended up losing. She possesses no talent and merely made him waste time. She wanted to demonstrate that she could do it, that she could fulfill her dreams. But there remains no other option except to surrender and end up marrying Snape, and thinks that perhaps this is not so bad in the end. But Rick is the one who apologizes, since she exerted herself very much without complaining. But in reality she did complain indeed, but he feels that it is his fault for not seeing the true strength of Geese. Then he advises Angelica that she is not permitted to disrespect the other combatant, because he is going to demonstrate to her how far she can arrive if she continues the training. Shortly after that, Rick already finds himself in the Colosseum, face to face with Geese, who comments that yesterday he had gone a little bit over the line, and wanted merely to apologize, since if he had killed Angelica, she would not have to continue with her miserable life, and he wanted to apologize to her for not having turned her away from her misery. Rick then becomes infuriated and the combat begins. Rick advances and delivers a punch that makes him kneel. He mentions that it seems that the punches of a mediocre person like him can make a genius kneel. But Geese is infuriated and returns to attack against him. But Rick dodges, and with just one more blow, he returns to making the guy kneel. Angelica is surprised to see that his attack worked. Despite the skin of Geese being extremely hard, Rionette explains that it is not quite like that, because he barely used strength and only used a body control technique, causing internal damage. The strength of the blow does not explode on the exterior, but rather on the interior of the opponent, and no matter how hard he may be, if it hits at the right moment, it will cause enormous damage to him. Geese then advises that it is better not to underestimate him, and utilizes his strengthening magic of the Draconians. He attacks Rick once more, but he manages to block him, and Brufston, upon observing that Rick wants to use this to win the combat, becomes quite intrigued. But Geese attacks against him and delivers a kick to the poor guy. Brufston notices that the Dragon Force magic utilizes a lot of magical energy, and Snape confirms that yes, but Geese has not trained his magical capacities much. He in reality was born with them, and Rick then returns to attack, but his attack now has no effect. Angelica is surprised upon seeing that now Geese is utilizing a cutting cut and the body strengthening. Snape comments that it was something highly expected, and Brufston responds that it is very interesting that he sees it that way, and mentions to Rick that the opinion about him matters very little. What truly matters is what Angelica thinks at this moment. And in this we see how Geese begins to become short of breath, because he has very low endurance, and he is surprised to see how Rick is not even bleeding. Thereupon Rionette comments that this is another body control technique, which disperses any attack throughout the whole body, so he practically received no damage. Geese asks if he is underestimating him, and if he is holding back, and Rick responds that he truly is holding back, because he limited his abilities to the same level as Angelica, and is fighting as if he were her. Although with the first blow he did not hold back, because he possessed a lot of anger. Brufston then comments that the most important thing for Rick is not solely to win this combat, but rather to show Angelica her true potential. In summary, it is as if this were a simulated rematch of Angelica against Geese, and this causes the guy to become even more infuriated. But Rick recommends that it is better for him to think well about his movements, because very little strength remains to him. But Geese does not care at all, and utilizes his techniques that copy, and attempts to attack the young man. But Rick with a single blow makes him kneel once more, and advises that he is very exhausted, and magical energy is lacking for him. Then he explains that it is something very normal for someone who never had to exert themselves in life. Snape then is surprised upon seeing the abilities of Rick, which greatly surpass the talent of Geese. Although the rest of the companions say that in truth, Rick is someone completely ordinary, and possesses no talent, revealing that when he began to train, it was too late to be able to increase his magical reserves, so they could say that he is well below average. But it is that classic situation, hard work against natural talent, and here, natural talent lost. He managed to surpass Geese, thanks to his arduous training, and Rick comments to Geese that since he never exhausted himself before, perhaps he does not even know how to move in this state, and therefore his precision is failing greatly. But those who exert themselves every day are always exhausted, and they continue to move, even when they could not. The truly strong continue, even if no strength remains, and the infuriated Geese can no longer endure this. But Rick detains his attack. It is certain that he is a genius, but on the ladder of geniuses, he would only be at level 1, because the true geniuses utilize all their innate talent and exert themselves even more. He above all has seen true geniuses, above level 1000, who possess a talent that turns his stomach. He may think what it truly is to be the strongest in the world, but that is only because he has faced opponents whom he can defeat. But the world is an enormous sphere, and he is only a small lizard in this world. He then ends up becoming infuriated and losing control, utilizing the greatest power of the Draconians. Angelica then is surprised to see that now he is a complete dragon, and Snape comments that the Draconians stem from the ancient dragons, and this is an ancestral power. The blows of Rick now do nothing to him, and he comments that he truly had a lot of luck, and doubts greatly that he can win. Geese comments that finally he understands him. He is just a cursed worm to him as well. Although Rick comments that now, not even Angelica can defeat him. But truly a young lady could never defeat a guy like this, and simply he should surrender. But Rick mentions that this is precisely why he has trained to death. So he sustained his training for 6 months, brutally increasing his speed, and immediately after, it takes about 9 months to be able to deliver a powerful punch, and Angelica is surprised to see that now, she herself is very far from that level. Rick is utilizing the burst dash, and this is the strength that she could achieve after a year of training. Probably normal training cannot overcome talent. For that very reason they have to go far beyond traditional training, exerting themselves to the maximum every single second. If you train for only a single month and end up losing, he simply must continue training for a whole year, until he manages to complete his objectives. Then he asks which side her scale is tilting toward, and Angelica responds that she was born with a scale that only tilts to one side. Rick then asks Geese what it is that he plans to do, since he will not be able to win against him. He will only be able to win if he exerts himself and does everything possible, but that is something that he hates to do. Geese then responds that he does not need to do such stupidity, and brutally attacks him. But Rick utilizes the same technique from before. Although he complains because it did not turn out all that well, he finishes by smashing Geese, and comments that he was quite lucky, while she, upon seeing it, rejoices over the overwhelming victory of Rick. Then they take him to the stretcher, and all the spectators applaud the victory of Rick. Angelica thanks him for everything, although Rick responds that he did no more than what was necessary to win his combat. Then Angelica responds that she is going to show him that she can reach his level in 1 year, or even surpass it, and the spectators begin to idolize Rick. While Angelica comments that Snape is very calm, despite the fact that he lost, so probably he must be quite surprised. Snape really is surprised, but inside he did not want his little brother to lose. He ended up losing a lot of money. Although for some reason he does not feel bad, nevertheless it is a pity that she is no longer his wife, and Angelica comments that now he has no money for the contract, and cannot do anything. He then laments that he will not be able to enter the nobility through her, but Angelica responds that sincerely it is a pity that now he will not have a wonderful wife like her. It is then that in another scene we see Kelvin's coach asking how he feels. He says that the boy is a great fighter, and that he expects a lot from him, and Kelvin asks if he ate something spoiled. But the old man asks him to leave and give the best of himself. And now we see that he is going to face the man who knocks out all of his rivals with a single blow. That is Brufston. The public cheers Kelvin on a lot, but that was to be expected, since the guy is the undefeated champion until today. The fight then begins and Kelvin loses no time, and attacks him with a shower of blows. But Brufston with a massive hit creates a large curtain of smoke, and Kelvin becomes very excited that now he is going to have a worthy rival. But in that the battle is joined by Geese, who out of control tries to attack the public, and Snape gets scared upon seeing this. Everyone in the grandstands also runs away scared, and Kelvin asks what on earth he is doing in the middle of combat. Geese out of control attacks him, but he stops him very easily, and with a single blow he puts him against the wall, leaving him out of combat. Angelica is surprised to see that he knocked him out with a single blow, and Rick mentions that in his training, he could feel that Geese was at the level of an A-rank adventurer, but Kelvin is probably at the level of an S-class. Regrettably, the incident left many spectators injured, so the combat is going to be postponed until the following day. Kelvin laments because he wanted to be able to fight with all his strength, although Brufston responds that if it is so there really is nothing to be done, since he can perceive a lot of doubt in his blows. He then becomes serious, and a while later the companions go to spend time in a tavern. The little girl Eliseret comments that only Brufston or Rick needs to win, and at that Angelica asks where Rick is, who did not come with them, and Rionette responds that he went to run about 700 km round trip. While we see how he is running, and they observe the mountain, and for some strange reason upon seeing this weird mountain, he ends up remembering Rionette's breast. However, the mountain crumbles into pieces due to Kelvin, who is training. Rick then approaches him and apologizes for appearing out of nowhere, and Kelvin responds that in reality he is releasing accumulated energy since the combat was postponed. He then attacks Rick, while he asks that they train together, and Rick ends up accepting and also attacks him. Kelvin blocks the attack, although he is surprised upon feeling the great speed, and Rick responds that this is quite rare, since he was able to block his attack. And then upon exchanging blows he sees that Rick is very strong, and asks that he understand him. He then begins to tell his story, saying that he was raised in the lowest slums of the city. There was nothing he liked more than brawling. But a certain point arrived where they were no longer just brawls. Upon arriving in this current city, things started well, but soon no one could give him a worthy fight. None of his rivals could last more than a minute, but at least the gym owner rejoiced at his victories, so it was not all that bad. But at the same time he could not feel any emotion. He remained there to make himself stronger and stronger, so he only focused on training. Until one day, while walking through the corridors, he overheard that his public was no longer watching the Colosseum, since the combatants ended with his blow, so they simply grew bored. His coach did not intend to let Kelvin hold back intentionally, but the other guy warned that if it continued like this, the public would decrease more and more, and in the end the gym would find itself affected. From that moment Kelvin began to pretend he had good days and bad days, until he managed to perfect it in a way that the public became very excited to see all his fights. And perhaps that is somewhat ridiculous, but that was what he did. But Rick responds that in reality being strong is not simple, although he should not continue the path thinking in that manner against Brufston. And after that he takes his leave. Thus arrives his long-awaited battle, and for the safety of the public this time they prepare a protective barrier. And it is then that the combat begins. Kelvin attacks the orc with great power, breaking Brufston's guard. The companions are surprised to see that he is quite strong, but Brufston notices that he was restraining himself. Kelvin reveals that if he fights with all his strength, the public will realize that he was pretending until now to be hit in the previous combats. That is something regrettable because he does not want to disappoint his public. Then Brufston responds that this is quite admirable and very professional on his part, putting the public in first place. Then he warns that he will fight at his same level, and will only use 2 fingers to face him. Furthermore, he will not move from that spot. Kelvin then is surprised to see his audacity, but he is impacted to see that Brufston is actually blocking all of his attacks with only 2 fingers. Kelvin then evades an attack, and the public goes wild, and cheers him on warmly. But he feels very frustrated, since he wanted to fight seriously, since that way it would be much more fun for him. He laments having to refuse the opportunity to face someone so strong, because he wants to test a lot of things in this combat. But at that moment his coach reprimands him. He tells him that he knows very well what he is doing to this day. He only pretends to go seriously, and asks why he is fighting. But Kelvin only wants to keep his gym alive. But the old man responds that his dream is to train the strongest fighter in history, and wants him to be the strongest. Their dreams are the same, and hopes that he manages to fulfill this in this battle. Then Kelvin becomes motivated and decides to fight with everything he has. He then feels very euphoric to finally fight seriously, and approaches Brufston, and with no intentions of holding back, connects with an exclusive attack. But Brufston does not even care. He simply blocks with the palm of his hand, and Kelvin asks what happened about using 2 fingers, and Brufston responds that he blocked with the appropriate strength. Kelvin advances again, although it is in vain, and upon being left unprotected with a single blow, the orc puts him against the wall. By luck Kelvin uses his steel skin, and rejoices to finally find a great opponent. But the people, annoying as always, begin to grow disappointed, upon seeing that he had been deceiving them, by not showing his true strength. Kelvin then uses his level 5 fire elemental magic, leaving everyone surprised, since the beastmen of the dog tribe are terrible at magic. But Kelvin had to train a lot to be able to master it, and Rick is surprised, since it is at the same level as Brufston, and Brufston is a genius, as a general rule. The orc then blocks his attack, while the coach is surprised to see that Kelvin is using magic, since he was not even aware of it. Kelvin then attacks again, using 7th level magic, imprisoning Brufston. But Rick worries, because he did not expect Kelvin to be so strong, and he uses 8th level magic, creating an enormous meteor, and everyone in the grandstands is impressed. Rick is scared to death, because the champion is really very strong, and Brufston now is not going to hold back at all. He finally frees himself from the bonds, and with a single devastating blow, he completely annihilates Kelvin's 8th level magic, solely with his brute strength. And now you just have to look at Rick's face, to see that Brufston is not holding back in the slightest. Brufston then warns that now he is going to respond with his own convictions, and Rick explains that orcs have a tradition with a thumb of defiance, which means that now the veteran will cease defending himself to begin attacking. Kelvin then feels true terror, but manages to evade the blow, but the blast of air ends up blowing him far away and causing considerable damage to him. Angelica worries, while Kelvin attacks with everything he has, but the orc does not even move. After throwing so many potent strikes, Kelvin becomes exhausted, and Brufston, without even blinking, connects a tremendous punch to the ribs of the poor guy. By luck, Kelvin manages to soften the blow with fluid movements and the burst dash, but despite this his bones, organs, are greatly affected. Any other person would have kicked the bucket already, and if he surrenders, he will be able to rest. But the guy has been looking for a rival like this for a long time, and he is not going to let this opportunity pass. This is the fight he yearned for so much, and although he has no magic, he still has his strength remaining. It is then that he begins to attack with everything he has left, but he ends up exhausting himself, and is greatly impressed to discover that there are people much stronger than him throughout the world, and at that the public begins to cheer Kelvin on, and they ask for him to stand up. He is moved upon seeing that despite having deceived them for so much time, they still cheer him on, and he finds strength, from where he has none, to stand on his feet. He desires only to deliver one more blow, and utilizes his burst dash, and delivers a brutal punch, combined with some magic. He then creates a powerful attack that impacts Brufston squarely, leaving the entire public moved before this spectacle. But Brufston is a tough nut to crack. He does not even move, and congratulates him for having used all of his strength. He responds that he gave him everything he had, and had never had so much fun before, and Brufston warns him that in honor of his great battle, he is going to demonstrate his respect, and delivers a punch to the face, and finishes by leaving Kelvin out of combat. His coach mentions that training the strongest fighter in history is not going to be easy at all, but despite everything, Kelvin remains, being the best fighter in history, and finishes falling to the ground, with a smile on his face. They finish by declaring Brufston as champion. While he returns, he is congratulated by Rick and by Angelica, and they comment that his victory was overwhelming. But Brufston comments that the blow of the champion was an exceptional blow, and Rick mentions that now, since he simply won, they must withdraw from there, since they are already going to get the gem anyway. But Brufston grabs him by the shoulder, and says that he expects a lot from his combat, and he is left speechless, and Brufston continues his way, while poor Rick is left there astonished. On the other side, Kelvin observes the newspaper, and notices that many are against him. Now he is the villain, and he does not even know what he should do. He asks what would have been better. Although his coach comments that everything is turning out very well, the old man also asks where he got that last attack from, since it left him quite impressed. Although Kelvin does not remember, because he let himself go completely in the fight. His coach asks him to give it a name. It should be something like Spiral Punch, or something of the sort. That would be a very good name for the blow. But Kelvin feels quite bad, because he was deceiving him and the public. Furthermore, he lost, and does not believe they deserve a second opportunity. But his coach says that he is being an idiot. It does not matter that he lost. He must only become much stronger than before, and thus he will win as always. Kelvin asks why he worries so much about him, and the old man simply is surprised, and says that he is as if he were a son to him. Kelvin then becomes very emotional, and tries to tell him that the guy is like his father. But at that they are interrupted by Brufston, who cut their entire mood, and they then try to pretend that nothing is happening. And soon Brufston asks how his wounds are, and Kelvin says that everything hurts because of him. Brufston then tries to heal him, but Kelvin stops him, because it had been a very long time since he felt this pain. He comments that everything turned out as Rick predicted, since he had commented that if he fought without worrying against him, now he would be wishing to see the final, and that is exactly what is going to happen. On the other side, we see how Snape is looking for Rick, who is locked in his room, and Angelica reprimands him, telling him to get out of there and stop behaving like a child. But he says that he does not want to die again. Poor Rick is traumatized, all because of this accursed orc. It is then that Snape approaches, and comments that he wanted to give him some encouragement, but did not expect to come across this. Snape comments that now that Kelvin lost, the public is very excited to see the final, and is expecting him to participate. Although Rick has no intention of leaving that place, since his life is more important than that. It is then that Snape invents a lie out of nowhere, commenting that thousands of people worked on this Colosseum, tens of millions accumulate there, and tens of thousands of fans from all over the kingdom await the final. but if he simply wants to go away because he fears for his life, there will be no other solution but to throw everything out the window, and the people will have to surrender and forget their dreams. After that he withdraws from their singing, while Angelica looks at him like a strange creature. Soon after a while she comments that she already listened to Snape, and he has to prepare for the final. Furthermore, even if they kill him, he can simply come back to life, so what difference does it make? But Rick responds that she is only saying that because she has never died, since although he can resurrect, dying is very terrifying. Angelica then mentions that Brufston's training was truly traumatic, but he could endure it for 2 years, so why now is he so afraid to face him a single time? Rick then responds that training and fighting are not the same thing, and she cannot understand that, and Angelica becomes very emotional, and comments that she respected him as her master, but it seems that she misjudged him. Soon after that she withdraws, and the guy says to Rick if by chance he has never wondered why on the day he arrived at the castle, Brufston already had a training plan for him, and it was not for just anyone, but rather a 2-year one. Rick responds that probably it was to help him with the Kaiser, but the guy responds that in part it was indeed that, but he had another objective in mind. He wanted to train someone with whom he could fight on equal terms. The culture of the orcs is based on fighting, and through fights they understand each other better, but since he is too strong, he could never fight with anyone, and always felt very lonely, and for that reason he says that his dream is to be able to fight on equal terms with someone. He is completely free to leave if he wants, but he should think a little about what he feels, and at that Elisabeth arrives there, and comments that Brufston has a great desire to fight with him, so she asks that he play a little bit with Brufston, while Rick remembers the day he was received at the castle of the Orichalcum Fist. Rionette presented him to the orc, and that upon taking his hand he realized that he had no knowledge in martial arts, and that his magical energy was at the minimum. At that moment he lacked what was necessary to be an adventurer, and Rick imagined that he would also tell him that it was better for him to forget this dream. But Brufston said the opposite. He said that he is going to need hundreds of times more training than someone with talent, and for that reason asks if he was prepared to endure it. And once more in the present Angelica is quite upset, because Rick is very pathetic, and asks Mizette if by chance Brufston was that terrifying in his training. He tells that it was a hell on earth, and is very surprised that Rick can converse with sanity. Angelica comments that he had no ability, and decided to become an adventurer at 40 years old. But Elisabeth comments that Rick did indeed have an ability, and it is an innate ability. What happens is that its activation is a bit complex, and he cannot control his strength, and his body does not tolerate it very well. So Brufston prohibited him from utilizing it. And on the other side, already in the evening, Rick asks Rionette if he appears to be someone pathetic, and she responds that she does not believe he is pathetic, because whatever he chooses, he will continue being himself. But if he said that he wanted to fight with Brufston, although he does not want to do it, she would like it much more if he did. And soon in another scene, the expected day of the combat has arrived. The public is euphoric, and Snape is very nervous, because he thinks that Rick will leave before the combat. But it is then that we see Rick, who is preparing to go out. Angelica asks if he is certain of this, and he says that he is prepared, and thinks of using everything against Brufston. Everything that he taught him. He thinks of giving a beating to the guy. It is then that the commentators mention some prizes, and they say that there will be some bonuses, and various nice little things, and at that Rionette approaches Rick, and whispers something in his ear, causing him to change his attitude. In another scene, the two find themselves face to face, and Rick warns Brufston that he should not think of holding back, while he hopes that it will be a good fight, and wants him to utilize everything that he taught him in these 2 years. Kelvin knows that the two are very strong individuals, so he does not know who will win, and the commentator starts the fight, and Rick loses no time and already leaps to the attack. With the burst dash he manages to make a cut on Brufston, while Snape becomes very surprised, asking what magical class he utilized. Although Elisabeth mentions that neither of the two is utilizing magic, their combat is based on brute strength and body enhancement, where Rick attacks continuously. Although Brufston does not even move, Angelica, surprised, understands that it is difficult to reach the level that these two have, and the combat is being very proactive. She asks Rionette what it was that she said a short while ago, and Rionette reveals that she said that if he won, he could take her to those hot springs. And with that he became very motivated. There is no way not to be motivated. She went straight to the guy's weak spot. Angelica, surprised, comments that if they go to the hot springs, they could spend the night there, and then it might be that something more would happen. And Rionette, very calm, comments that yes, and Angelica becomes very flushed, preferring to focus on the combat, and Rick is very tired, and Brufston decides to attack, so as not to lack respect, and Rick is only defending himself. He charges a very powerful attack, but Rick manages to evade it. But the shockwave makes the entire Colosseum tremble. Kelvin mentions that this was a very powerful blow, and it was 5th level elemental magic, and Rick is scared to death, because if it was going to be launched against him, definitively he will die. Brufston almost lands an attack on him, and Angelica gets scared. But Rionette, very calm, says that she can rest assured, since Rick manages to evade utilizing the air crucifixion. This is a 1st level magic, and he blocked the blow with basic magic. But that is not the most incredible thing. The truly incredible thing is that he utilized it without even stopping. He used this magic instantly, without the need to cast, and Brufston recognizes his great precision with incantations, since not even he is capable of utilizing this magic without chanting. Rick responds that he owes it to Mizette and Elisarette, and Mizette comments that he was very scared when he failed on the first attempt, because on that day he ended up losing half of his body. Rick then approaches Brufston with the burst dash, and soon launches a wave of fluid attacks, but Brufston does not even move. Rick attacks him head-on, and Brufston counterattacks. Rick evades him, but remains in the air, unprotected. When Brufston is about to send him to the other world, Rick utilizes air crucifixion again, but on his feet, leaving Kelvin surprised. Soon he casts an air shot and fires against Brufston, but he does not even move once more, and Angelica is surprised, since brute strength, strategy, and intelligence are on another level. This is a true fight of S-rank monsters. Rick realizes that his attack has no effect, and has no more options but to start attacking as close as possible. Brufston comments that he has become quite strong, and feels very proud that his training has given results. Rick then thinks that Brufston never lies when he makes a compliment, so he feels quite honored, and does not know how happy he makes him with just that. These are the words of a master to his pupil. Then Rick decides to recount that Mizette revealed the reason why he had trained him. Now that he knows what his dream is, he thinks of helping to fulfill it. Brufston feels honored, and comments that there is no other solution. There is no reason to worry, since it is not that big of a deal, and if he is considered, he would feel very happy with that. But that is all. Rick responds that he does not believe it is so, since he trained him with great passion, which shows that he wants this very much, and now he simply wants to thank him for everything he did. And if he wants to fight with honor and respect, then he cannot do less than show him all of his respect. Brufston becomes very moved by this, and comments that he is a very fortunate person. It has been more or less 2 years since Rionette brought him to them, and now he is one more member in the group, so he decides to take this opportunity to talk more about the past, the story of how he created the Orichalcum Fist. Now we see how 46 years ago, Brufston was being just a little boy. He noticed that he was not like the members of his group. His appearance was different, but also his way of thinking. He obtained books abandoned by humans, and began to understand the letters and their culture, and imitated the humans in everything. Then, since the humans had a name, he decided to call himself Brufston. The orcs exchanged opinions through blows, and this behavior allowed them to understand each other. But since he was extremely strong, he could not feel anything through them. So he tried to improve his life, and the life of his peers, teaching them fire, and how to build settlements, as well as new forms of communication. But when he realized it, everyone adored him as a god, and no one wanted to approach, including his own family. His people changed their minds on the basis of punches, to soon share food while smiling, while as for Brufston, he could only observe them from afar, completely alone. One day, he moved away a bit from the group, but upon returning, everyone was buried under the debris. He was incapable of uttering a word, not because of losing his family, but rather because he could not feel anything. And soon one night while reading, he was attacked by an adventurer. Although he, upon seeing that it was an orc with a book in hand, was surprised. Furthermore, behind him was a wyvern, which had been attacking the village for some time. He asked if the guy was the one responsible, but Brufston responded, leaving him even more surprised. Upon discovering that he could speak, the people of the settlement had asked him to finish off an orc that was prowling the villages. But obviously he is not like the others, and apologizes for having attacked him out of nowhere, and asks that he tell a little more about himself. Brufston then told his story, and the redhead understood the reason why he felt so lonely. In this manner he wanted a friend who could fight on equal terms, so he proposes they pursue together the dreams that he has not been able to fulfill. The old man reveals that he fought alongside the beloved hero, and a short while ago the people considered him a legend. But Brufston responds that he read the book, and all of that occurred more or less 200 years ago. The old man is surprised to learn that he read the book, and he reveals that it was he himself who wrote it, although no one believes him. Brufston asks if by chance his dream is to defeat the Kaiser, and the elder confirms that yes, both pursue impossible dreams, although Brufston's might be easier to fulfill, so the orc accepts the proposal, and thus he converted into an adventurer. Together they founded the Orichalcum Fist, and just as the elder promised, he attracted powerful people like Brufston. Each one had a peculiar strength, but he yearned for a fist-to-fist combat, as the orcs do, and that was not something he could ask of his companions. And for that reason he devised a training plan, although Mizet doubted that anyone could survive it. Nevertheless, one never knows when the world is going to surprise us. And there appeared Rick. Brufston apologizes for having told his story, and hopes that they can continue their duel. And Rick thinks that in the last 2 years, the veteran did not separate from him while he trained, and remembers when Brufston told about the customs of the thumb, causing Rick to put his thumb up, to demonstrate to him that he will cease defending himself and will begin to attack. He apologizes to Rionette, since now they will not be able to go to the hot springs, and Brufston contentedly accepts his challenge, and both begin to exchange punches. While this goes on, Rick wonders why he was so afraid, and why he tried to flee from him, although at that instant, he received a powerful punch to the stomach. I think it was to remind him why he wanted to run, but he continues fighting, that he must return a favor to Brufston, since thanks to him, now he is fulfilling his dream. Both continue breaking each other there with everything they have, to the point of beginning to crack the barrier of the Colosseum. Mizet asks that Eliseret prepare her magic, because this is going to get quite ugly. Mizet begins to cast his high-level divine magic, evacuating everyone from there, with the exception of Kelvin, who is quite scared. He asks what he did with everyone, and Mizet responds that he evacuated everyone, since nobody there wants to die. Right. Everyone is shocked, and they ask what happened, while Rick and Brufston continue smashing each other. It seems that Rick is going to win the combat, but Brufston's power is far superior, and the Colosseum begins to crumble into pieces. Brufston with a punch sends Rick flying. He tries desperately to get up, but his legs are trembling. He remembers everything that Brufston did for him, and decides that it is not the moment to fall. He continues receiving one blow after another, and Rick continues being thrown against the wall, destroying the Colosseum. The citizens are surprised upon seeing him, while he wonders if by chance he has already reached his limit. He thinks that he can rest now, because perhaps Brufston is already satisfied. But upon seeing him, he feels that he looks at him with too much desire, but his body is already at the limit, and Angelica thinks that everything is finished. But Rionette and Eliseret comment that Rick is still not fighting seriously, and he on his side thinks that it is still not enough to compensate Brufston for everything that he has done. So he activates his innate ability, the Reckless Soul. His companions begin to laugh upon seeing Brufston's face of surprise, and Angelica asks what is going on, and Rionette reveals that they had been pointing this out about Brufston. The others also did a special training with Rick, and now he even has a certain control over his ability, and knows what he needs to be able to activate it. Angelica asks what it is, and Rionette reveals that Rick must want to surpass his limits. In order to face someone who is stronger than he is, he does not need magical energy or anything of the sort to be able to activate it, only pure force of will. From that moment on, the true combat will begin. Both return to connecting their shower of blows, where the orc realizes that he always wanted a fight on equal terms, but now understands that he has friends capable of doing all this for him. And for a long time now he has no longer been alone. Both surpass themselves every second, and the next blow could be the decisive one. The combatants deliver a forceful headbutt to each other, and after a while, when the smoke dissipates, we see both standing face to face, and Rick mentions that after all this, he could not defeat him, and ends up fallen on the ground, while Brufston responds what is it that he is saying, since in the end, he was able to fulfill his dream, in addition to demonstrating his worth, and the victory is completely his. Both end up on the ground, and a while later, Rick awakens in the infirmary, accompanied by Rionette. After a while the rest of the group arrives, which reveals that he had been sleeping for 3 days, Although the last time he used this ability, he slept for a week, so I think the training was actually quite effective. Rick asks why he has the belt, and Brufston responds that the result of the duel, it was he who won, but the challenge, the one who won was Rick. But Rick responds that if Brufston wanted to, he would have used the total healing, and thus he never could have defeated him. But Brufston responds that this is not true, and says to everyone present who dedicated their time to helping him fulfill his dream, that he is deeply grateful to them, and Rick does not understand what is going on. So Angelica explains that the companions wanted to surprise Brufston, and for that reason they helped with his innate ability. Rick thought that they only did that out of good faith, but now he understood everything. Soon after that, Brufston removes the gem from the belt, thus obtaining the second gem out of the 6, the gold of the sovereign. They are closer and closer to defeating the Kaiser, and Rionette already has the replacement gem for the belt, while Elisarette carries it, so that it cannot be distinguished from the original. At that, curious Rick asks Brufston how old his Reinhardt is, since according to the legends of Yamato, they are from more or less 200 years ago, and Brufston responds that he does not know his age, but that is what they appear to be. His innate ability extends his life. Rick then comments that it has been years since being able to see him, and very probably he must be searching for the gems on his own account. But Brufston responds no, that Rascal must deliver a book that he still has not finished, and now he is fleeing. At night Snape meets with Kelvin, and he reveals that Rick and Brufston refused a prize and cancelled their participation, so he will continue being the champion of everything, since they cannot leave the throne without the winner. And Kelvin gets upset, because he cannot accept being the champion just because. The following day Brufston says goodbye to his fans, who begin to cry, and one asks for him to adopt him, and the other to marry her, but they soon begin to argue. And on the other side Rick decides to distribute the provisions from the prize throughout the neighborhood, while Brufston thanks Reinhardt, because his dream came true. And sometime later Angelica says goodbye to the group, but tells them that Elisarette will return with them, since she asked Brufston to train her, and Rick, scared, asks if she is certain of this, because definitively she will die. But she responds that this is exactly what she wants, since she decided to be at the same level as him, or perhaps surpass him. Rick then hopes that someday she returns, and they meet once more. And at that Angelica asks if by chance he thinks of returning home running, and obviously he responds yes. And this time it will be about 2,800 kilometers, leaving the girl impacted. And since saying such a ridiculous number has no grace anymore, she asks how long it will take to arrive, and he says that it will be about 3 days, leaving her surprised, since it will take only 3 days, while the carriage will do that in months. In this manner the food will end up spoiling. Although Elisarette mentions to her that this is resolved with a little magic. Then Mizette uses his strengthening magic on the horse, and it basically transforms into a Ferrari, and Angelica cannot accept so many madnesses like that. But when they are about to leave, Rionette asks Rick when they will go to the hot springs, and he becomes very flushed, and Angelica too, because Rick does not know what to say, since this prize would only be if he won. But Brufston responds that he did indeed win, so everything is fine. Rick then begins to travel in his thoughts, but the doubt remains, because to him he did not win, but in reality he is only afraid to spend this time with Rionette. So Mizette, to remove all doubts, says that the combat ended in a draw, and they could solve it with a race back home. If Rick wins, he takes the trips to the hot springs, but if he loses, Brufston will multiply his training by 100, and thus the real race begins, leaving Rick behind. And Rionette says that definitively, he will take her to the hot springs, and thus everyone goes running to their new home. It took a little bit of time, but Rick managed to make his dream a reality, right? But this is not the end, because he still has another dream to fulfill. He is his 40 years of age, but that makes no difference at all. He is going to manage to get there. And thus we finish our anime, which leaves a very good message for you. It is never too late for you to start something. So if you liked it, already leave the like and subscribe to the channel, activate the notifications and comment down below. Sharp cut. For us to know that you watched until the end. We are together. That is it. Thanks, goodbye, and until the next video.